A lot of people enjoy traveling solo without worrying that something bad could happen. The main perks are the total freedom to do whatever you want, the ability to quickly adjust plans, and the rare chance to spend time alone with your own thoughts and feelings. However, alongside these benefits, there are also plenty of risks, especially for women who decide to take solo trips. The tragic story of María Luisa Cedeño, which happened in 2020 in Costa Rica, shocked the entire country and later made headlines internationally. The case drew widespread attention because it occurred at an expensive hotel in a popular resort area, and the victim was a well-known doctor who headed the anesthesiology department at one of the country's largest medical centers. Who was María Luisa Cedeño? María Luisa Cedeño was born on May 29, 1977, in La Fortuna, San Carlos, in the province of Alajuela, Costa Rica. She was the youngest of 5 children in a modest family. Her relatives were all simple workers with no education beyond what they got in school. From a young age, María Luisa was ambitious and very determined. She wanted to help others and dreamed of becoming a doctor, promising herself she'd be the first in her family to get a college degree. In school, her favorite subjects were chemistry and biology, and after graduating in 1994, she was accepted into the medical school at the most prestigious university in the country, located in San Jose. As a student, María Luisa moved to the capital and stayed there for the rest of her life, though she kept close ties with her family, regularly visiting and staying in touch with them. In 2000, after completing her degree, she started working as an anesthesiologist at one of the largest medical centers in the capital. She quickly advanced in her career, constantly learning and improving her skills. By 2015, Cedeño had become the head of the anesthesiology and recovery therapy department. She was loved and respected by her colleagues and became quite a prominent doctor, though she achieved all this by sacrificing her personal life. For a long time, María Luisa was alone and completely devoted to her work. In 2017, when she was 40, she started a romantic relationship with a doctor from the same hospital, although he worked in a different department. She believed he was the love of her life, someone she could build a strong and happy family with. However, at the beginning of 2020, the couple broke up because he started seeing a younger colleague. For María Luisa, the breakup was a devastating blow. She fell into a deep depression and buried herself in work for months, barely noticing anything around her. Her only comfort was her little dog, Mofalti, who she treated like her child. The last vacation. In July 2020, María Luisa decided she desperately needed a break and a change of scenery before she lost her mind. At the time, the COVID-19 pandemic was spreading worldwide, and various restrictions were in place to slow the virus. She chose to head to the coast and stay at a small but cozy hotel called La Mansión Inn, located in the scenic Punta Arenas. This resort is usually popular with tourists from all over the world, but with the pandemic and strict lockdowns, it was almost deserted. At the hotel where she checked in, only a few rooms were occupied. However, the peace and quiet were exactly what she was looking for. María Luisa planned to spend the weekend there and head home on Monday. She brought along her beloved dog, Mofalti. She stayed in a ground-floor room that had a second door leading to a private courtyard. These rooms were designed for travelers with pets so that the animals could go outside and take care of their business in a designated area. All the other rooms with courtyard access were empty at the time. On July 18th, María Luisa checked in, dropped off her things, and headed to the beach. The next day passed just as quietly. She strolled along the shore, sunbathed, had dinner at the restaurant, and then went back to her room. She called her mother, and they talked for about half an hour. María Luisa mentioned how empty the hotel was, with only a few staff members, most of whom were juggling multiple jobs. She planned to check out the next morning after breakfast, but she never made it that far. A lifeless body wrapped in a sheet. On the morning of July 20th, Maria Louisa didn't show up for breakfast. The hotel staff noticed this because there were so few guests, but they didn't think much of it, assuming she was just sleeping in before heading home. But when checkout time came and she still hadn't appeared, they decided to check her room. 2 staff members knocked on Maria Luisa's door, but there was no answer. They could hear her dog barking inside, so they knew she had to be there. They kept knocking and calling her name, but the only response was the barking. So they went around to the courtyard to see if they could reach her that way. The second door was unlocked, and the staff decided to enter to make sure everything was okay. As soon as they stepped inside, they noticed brownish stains on the floor that looked like dried blood, and on the bed, they found a body wrapped in a sheet. The hotel staff immediately called emergency services and informed the management. Unfortunately, the paramedics could only confirm that Maria Louisa was dead. She had been killed several hours before her body was found. Everything about the scene was strange, from the condition of the room to the circumstances of her death. The investigation begins. Maria Louisa's body showed multiple cuts, bruises, and bite marks left by different people. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she had fought back fiercely. The cause of death was mechanical asphyxia and a broken neck. Someone had strangled her so hard that they broke her cervical vertebrae. The autopsy also revealed that she had been sexually assaulted before she died. Next to her bed, there was a bottle of mineral water, an open bottle of expensive wine, and 2 glasses. According to the maid, Maria Louisa had indeed ordered these items the night before, but she had been alone. The records of her keycard showed that after receiving her delivery, she didn't leave the room, and no one entered. However, the glass door to the courtyard didn't require a key, so the attacker could have gotten in that way. The hotel had plenty of security cameras, which might have shed some light on what happened. But it turned out none of them had been working for months. The administration claimed that due to the pandemic and the drop in guests, they had cut costs by shutting off the cameras. Forensic experts tested the bite marks on Maria Louisa's body for DNA, hoping to find the killer's saliva, but the results were shocking. The saliva found in the wounds was her own. Because the bite marks were on her face, neck, and chest, where she could not physically reach, investigators concluded that the perpetrator intentionally stained the wounds with her saliva to cover his tracks. Another surprising detail came from the pathologist, who reported that her body had been thoroughly washed after death. This meant that after she was attacked, tortured, and strangled, the perpetrator or perpetrators took her body to the bathroom, washed her, then laid her on the bed, stained the bite marks with her saliva, and wrapped her in a sheet. Since the hotel's cameras weren't working and the place was almost empty due to the pandemic, no witnesses were found. None of the guests or staff reported seeing or hearing anything unusual, and no strangers were spotted on the property. The first suspect. News of the brutal murder of a well-known anesthesiologist quickly spread across the country, causing a huge public outcry. The police needed to solve the case as soon as possible and figure out who could have been so cruel to an innocent woman. When the victim's family was asked if she could have had a brief vacation fling, they were sure the answer was no. She was still heartbroken over her recent breakup and hoping for reconciliation. As for the 2 glasses found in the room, Maria Louisa's sister explained that she always used 2, one for wine and one for water. The forensic results confirmed this, as only the victim's fingerprints and lip marks were found on the glasses. During the interview with the police, Maria Louisa's mother suddenly recalled that during her last phone call with her daughter, Maria had mentioned a man who worked at the hotel. She said they had chatted during lunch, and he asked her why she was traveling alone and how long she planned to stay. This gave detectives their first suspect to question. That employee was 38-year-old Teodor Herrera Martinez, the son of a longtime friend of the hotel owner, Harry Bodaan. In fact, thanks to his father's connections, Martinez had gotten the job at the hotel. He worked as a bartender and did personal errands for his boss. Right from the start of the interview, Martinez acted strange, very nervous, and claimed he didn't remember Maria Louisa or ever talking to her. Fresh scratches were clearly visible on his cheeks and neck, and he couldn't give a clear explanation of where they came from. When he was asked to remove his shirt, similar scratches were found on his chest and shoulders. Detectives suspected the victim had left those marks while fighting for her life, but they needed to wait for experts to confirm. Martinez was arrested, initially for 6 months, while the investigation continued. The second suspect. Forensics confirmed that blood and skin particles from Martinez were found under the victim's nails, but the bite marks on her body didn't match his dental impressions. The police continued to question hotel guests and staff until a 36-year-old man named Luis Carlos Miranda came into focus. He wasn't a regular guest and didn't work at La Mansión Inn, but he was a friend of the hotel owner, which allowed him to stay there for free. One of the bite marks on the victim's body could have been made by Luis, but it wasn't clear enough to be certain. Still, the police arrested him as a second suspect for 6 months, just like Martinez. Miranda, too, denied ever seeing Maria Louisa or having any contact with her. The third suspect. About a week and a half after the shocking murder, a third suspect was arrested, Harry Bodaan himself, the 69-year-old hotel owner. It's worth noting that Bodaan, a businessman of Dutch origin, had extensive connections with politicians and entrepreneurs and owned several properties in different countries. What led to his arrest was that one of the bite marks on the victim's body matched Bodaan's dental impressions. It also came to light that around 6 months before the murder, Bodaan had undergone surgery at the hospital where Cedeño worked. Despite Bodaan insisting that he had never seen the woman before, police believed he might have noticed her during that time, taken her contact information, and lured her to his hotel. Initially, due to his age and health issues, Bodaan was placed under house arrest. However, when he suddenly changed his residence without notifying the police, he was taken into custody, as there were fears he might try to leave the country. There was a fourth person involved in the case, Bodaan's young husband, a man named Yader Daniel Abanda. However, no evidence was found against him. Abanda denied involvement in the crime, claiming that his partner was not feeling well that night and did not leave their room. The investigation's theory. Once the autopsy and forensic results were in, investigators concluded that there were 3 attackers. There were no signs of ropes or restraints used to immobilize the victim, but all of her limbs showed bruises from fingers and palms, indicating she was held down by hand. In Maria Louisa's mouth, experts found fabric fibers and a thread, which suggested she had been gagged. This likely explained why none of the other guests or staff heard any screams, even though the victim's injuries and signs of torture showed she must have desperately called for help. In Maria's phone, found in her room, there were messages to her sister, where she praised the hotel, saying how beautiful, cozy, and quiet it was. She mentioned how attentive and helpful the staff was, and she even noted that she had spent the evening chatting and dancing at the bar with a man who served coffee and looked after the property. Based on the description, this was Martinez. From the beginning, Martinez was the prime suspect. He was the only one of the 3 suspects with visible scratches. His skin and blood were found under the victim's fingernails, and his biological material was found in her body despite attempts to wash it off. However, casts of his teeth did not match the bite marks on her skin. Since Maria Louisa hadn't left her room after returning that evening and hadn't let anyone in, investigators believed that the attackers entered her room through the door leading to the courtyard. She might have left it unlocked so her dog could go out, and since the neighboring rooms were empty, no one would have noticed. The attackers likely moved quickly. Once inside, they knocked Maria unconscious with a blow to the head, gagged her, and then tortured and assaulted her for several hours. When they were done, they strangled her so violently with their bare hands that they broke her neck. Afterward, they washed her body in the bathroom, placed it on the bed, and wrapped it in a sheet, contaminating the bite marks with her own saliva. The trial. All three suspects denied any involvement in the crime, each claiming they were asleep in their rooms that night. But there were no witnesses to confirm their alibis except for the hotel owner's husband, whose testimony was questionable from the start. However, strange text messages were found on the suspects' phones. In them, they shared disturbing intimate fantasies, and the day before the crime, they talked about a guest who was alone. The public trial didn't begin until September 2022, more than 2 years after the murder. 71-year-old Harry Bodaan appeared in court in a wheelchair as his knee problems had worsened, making it difficult for him to walk. Right away, the prosecution faced challenges in proving the involvement of Bodaan and Miranda. The evidence against them was mostly circumstantial. Text messages on their phones and dental impressions, which the defense argued should be dismissed because the bite marks weren't a perfect match with their dental records. The expert who was supposed to testify about the bite marks on the victim had been hired by Bodaan's lawyer. This orthodontist flew in from Madrid and claimed that the marks found on the victim's skin weren't strong enough evidence and couldn't definitively link the suspects to the crime. The day after his testimony, the expert returned to Spain, but the prosecution questioned his credibility. A follow-up investigation revealed that this individual wasn't properly accredited and was only a so-called expert by name. His testimony was thrown out, but the prosecution still struggled to prove the connection between the two main suspects and the bite marks. The prosecution argued that a crime this brutal and calculated couldn't have been committed by just one person. They believed at least 3 people were involved in the assault and murder. The defense, however, challenged this, pointing out that one strong man could have carried out the crime alone. The verdict. The only undeniable evidence was against Teodor Herrera Martinez. In addition to his semen being found inside the victim and his skin particles under her nails, investigators also found Maria Louisa's blood on both the outside and inside of his shoes, with the shoe prints matching those found at the threshold of her room and near the bed. As a result, Martinez was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 50 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. Given that he was 40 years old at the time of sentencing, this was effectively a life sentence. Martinez admitted that he had been intimate with the victim that night, but claimed it was consensual and insisted that someone else must have killed her after he left. Since there was no solid evidence against Bodaan and Miranda, aside from the bite marks and text messages, their involvement couldn't be proven. Both men were acquitted and released in March 2023. However, in September of that same year, an appeals court reviewed a complaint filed by the victim's family and ordered the case to be reopened. By that time, though, both Bodaan and Miranda had long since left Costa Rica. They fled the country as soon as they were released from court. Currently, they are living in the Netherlands, and even if the new trial finds them guilty, they won't face any punishment. This is because there is no extradition agreement between the Netherlands and Costa Rica, despite the severity of the crime. At the mercy of the elements. The world is such that accidents can happen anywhere. Even the simplest, most routine situation can turn disastrous. We take risks every day, yet naively believe we control everything. Some people intentionally invite risk into their lives. For some, it becomes a constant pursuit tied to their professional activities, while others occasionally seek a thrill. Extreme hobbies like skydiving, rock climbing, caving, parkour, and more fall into this category. Diving is also on the list of dangerous pastimes. The desire to explore the ocean depths is understandable. Water and its inhabitants have always attracted both researchers and ordinary people. The vastness of the water space, far larger than land, adds to its intrigue. Diving is one of the most popular activities, but it's not the safest. Many things can go wrong. Oxygen deprivation, barotrauma, encounters with dangerous animals or strong currents, and more. The most unexpected thing can happen. You could be forgotten during an underwater excursion. What may seem like a joke at first is actually a reality. The story of the Lonergan family is a tragic confirmation of this. Though the events occurred back in 1998, and many safety protocols have since been implemented to prevent such occurrences, this story still chills to the bone. Imagine the horror experienced by the two spouses left alone at sea. A quarter of a century has passed since then, yet many continue to debate what really happened to the couple. Was their disappearance the result of tragic negligence or a deliberate decision to end their lives? Let's try to figure this out together. The long-awaited dive. On January 25, 1998, Thomas and Eileen Lonergan left their hostel in the Australian town of Cairns. Leaving the northeastern part of Queensland behind, the young couple headed further north to Port Douglas. Their goal, a long-anticipated dive into the waters of the Great Barrier Reef. The world's largest coral reef system had long been a magnet for avid divers. At the designated location, the 33-year-old man and 28-year-old woman boarded the boat Outer Edge, along with other like-minded individuals. A total of 13 pairs set out that day to St. Crispin's Reef. The one-day excursion, costing around $100, was full of promise. The package included 3 dives in a picturesque and safe location, all under the supervision of an experienced crew. It's worth noting that the company providing underwater tourism services was considered one of the best and had years of experience, so travelers could pursue their dreams with peace of mind. The weather on January 25th was ideal for the tourists. By all accounts, it was a perfect day for scuba diving. The water at the dive site was pleasantly warm. From the start, the couple declined the services of guide Catherine Traverso, relying on their extensive experience. The Lonergans had completed 160 dives in their lifetime and were considered seasoned divers. The boat's passengers donned their gear and jumped into the coral sea. The diversity of flora and fauna was stunning. The Great Barrier Reef is home to around 1,500 species of fish and 400 types of coral. When the dive time was up, a signal sounded from the boat, clearly audible underwater, indicating it was time to surface. Afterward, everyone emerged and returned to the vessel. Around 3 p.m., the protagonists of this story took their third dive, descending to a depth of 39 feet. The underwater tour was coming to an end, and time flew by unnoticed. Within an hour, everyone was back on board. According to the crew, a head count was conducted, and the number of divers matched the original count, 26 people. That evening, the Outer Edge arrived in Port Douglas, but not all the divers disembarked. It turned out several tourists were missing. However, what was more horrifying was that no one had noticed this. The same applied to the 2 bags that remained on board. To this day, it's unclear how the crew miscounted the passengers and failed to notice the belongings left behind. One way or another, the missing individuals were Thomas and Eileen Lonergan, together forever. Thomas and Eileen met while studying at Louisiana State University, where Eileen was learning the basics of scuba diving. They instantly liked each other and began dating. The couple was deeply in love and inseparable. They went camping, swam in the ocean, and attended parties together. Their relationship was admired by many and seemed ideal. Some even envied their genuine love. No matter what they did it together. Eileen had a great passion for diving. She spoke about it with such enthusiasm that Thomas couldn't resist and soon shared his beloved's interest. Over time, the young couple earned their certification in this field. Eventually, on June 24, 1988, they sealed their union in marriage. The wedding took place in Jefferson, Texas. Since both were born and raised in Louisiana and had never traveled abroad, they dreamed of seeing the world. Thomas and Eileen were also known for their kindness and compassion, so when they were offered the opportunity to join the Peace Corps, they eagerly agreed. The Lonergans were perfect candidates for this role. During their student years, they participated in numerous charity projects and events, offering help to those in need. The Peace Corps, an independent U.S. government agency, sends volunteers to assist struggling countries, promoting friendship and peace worldwide. After a successful internship in Tuvalu, a country in Polynesia, the couple moved on to Fiji, where they taught children from impoverished families. At the time of these events, they had been married for 10 years. By then, they had completed their mission and were planning to return to the U.S. However, the Lonergans had one more wish: a world cruise. They wanted to visit famous places and take in the local beauty. Their return home was scheduled for March 1999, but first, they had a long and exciting journey ahead: the Great Barrier Reef. As avid divers, the couple had long dreamed of seeing the wonders of the Great Barrier Reef. This is why they ended up in Australia. The local attraction is renowned worldwide. Did you know it's the largest coral reef system on the planet? Created by marine organisms, it's a truly unique natural marvel. Its area surpasses the size of some countries and is even visible from space. The Lonergans wanted to capture this wonder in their memories forever, knowing it might not last. You can't imagine how Thomas and Eileen saw it back in 1998. Today, much of the ecosystem has vanished. Once vibrant and diverse, the corals have become bleached. While not dead, they are at high risk of disappearing forever if they become diseased or are exposed to destructive external forces. Even a slight rise in water temperature can cause this. For optimal coral growth, water temperatures need to be between 72 and 81 degrees Fahrenheit. The beauty of the Great Barrier Reef can still be enjoyed today, but in the face of the greenhouse effect, its days are numbered. A significant coral bleaching event occurred in 1997 to 1998, which is why our couple was in such a hurry. They rushed to see the reef while it was still alive, only to encounter death instead. Criminal negligence. Based on general knowledge and film scenarios, we can imagine the scene that unfolded before the couple after they surfaced. An endless sea stretched around them, with no sign of the only symbol of safety: the outer edge boat. Two young people, without food or water, were left alone amidst the vast ocean. Surrounding them were threats in the form of dangerous sharks, the blazing sun, and the risk of dehydration. The desperate divers could only hope that their disappearance would be noticed and that they would be rescued in time. After all, according to the rules, the number of people on board must be counted multiple times, before the dive and after. Even if a miscount occurred, records should be made upon surfacing about the dive depth, air levels in the tanks, and so on. In short, the required documentation should have been kept. In the end, even if none of this had been done, the Lonergans' personal belongings remained on board, which surely couldn't have gone unnoticed. Initially, the couple likely thought it was a funny mistake, something they would laugh about later when telling their friends. But as the hours passed, nothing changed. Two at sea. The realization of the inevitable came slowly. No one wants to believe in the worst until the very end. Over time, the forgotten couple began to assess their situation more clearly. In reality, Thomas and Eileen could do nothing. There was no one in sight, and calling for help was pointless. Swimming to shore was equally impossible. There were no islands nearby. Despite being experienced divers, it was unrealistic to cover the 60-mile distance to land. Adding to their fears was the fact that Australia is home to the largest and most vicious sharks in the world. It wouldn't take much for these predators to attack the stranded tourists and deal with them. The couple had no tools to defend themselves from this looming threat. Nor did they have any water or food with them. It is known that the average life expectancy without water is 2 to 4 days. For some, this period may stretch a few extra days. While a person can survive much longer without food, water is essential. Without it, dehydration sets in after 5 to 7 days. How long a person can endure without sustenance depends on their health, body mass, willpower, and the climate. Regardless, death under these conditions is slow and agonizing. On top of that, they faced scorching heat, increasing the likelihood of sunstroke or heat exhaustion. The only two comforting thoughts at that moment were these. First, they were not alone in this situation, but together, as they had always been. Second, as divers, they were unlikely to drown. Their gear included buoyancy compensators, which are much more reliable than life jackets. The next danger they faced came in the form of strong winds and powerful currents. They were being carried farther and farther away. Even if someone began searching for them after a while, they would no longer be in the same location. The most tragic aspect, however, was that there were pontoons just 1.5 to 2 miles away. These floating platforms, anchored to the ocean floor, provide a place to rest. Had the Lonergans known about this, things could have been very different. They could have waited for help in relative safety, resting, and even sleeping. But alas, a different fate awaited them. The couple was being swept into open waters, farther from any chance of rescue. With about 5 hours left until sunset, night, the most dangerous time, was approaching. For when everything sleeps, the sea comes alive. A chance at rescue. At this time, the 24 passengers of the Outer Edge and the crew had all disembarked. The exhausted tourists headed to their hotel rooms, and the boat's crew returned home to their families. No one gave a thought to anything being wrong. No one cared about the belongings left aboard. Everyone was simply tired after a busy day and eager for rest. The next day brought no significant changes. However, there was one moment that should have drawn attention. Another group of divers visited the Great Barrier Reef. The familiar boat pulled up to its usual spot, and the tourists descended into the water. Upon resurfacing, one of them told a crew member that they had noticed diving weights on the ocean floor. These weights, part of a diver's equipment, are used to counteract buoyancy. Most likely, the discovered gear belonged to Thomas and Eileen, who had detached them. But the crew member didn't take the information seriously, chalking it up as an interesting find. Yet such items don't simply lie around on the ocean floor for no reason. The negligent worker should have treated the discovery with the attention and caution it deserved. Unfortunately, another mistake and act of negligence occurred. Had an alarm been raised, perhaps the search for the missing couple would have started sooner, and they might have survived. The cruel irony of fate, waiting for help and fighting for your life while people and a boat are not far away. Sadly, this is often the case. Life and death walk side by side. 2 days later. On January 27th, during the cleaning of the boat, someone finally noticed the forgotten belongings. Curious to find out who they belonged to, the bag was opened, revealing dry clothes, a wallet, and documents in the names of Thomas and Eileen Lonergan. The crew remembered seeing the couple 2 days prior. During that time, no one had come to claim the items, which was quite strange. This is when things started to become clear. The skipper who made the discovery immediately reported everything to the police. The investigation began right away. Everyone understood the gravity of 2 tourists disappearing. Law enforcement officers checked the missing couple's hotel room. Unsurprisingly, there were no guests inside. The hotel staff confirmed they had seen the couple before their trip on Sunday morning. After that, they never returned. However, no one had raised any alarms since the room had been prepaid, and it was assumed their excursion could have lasted several days. Tension mounted. The police interviewed the Outer Edge crew as well as all the passengers from the past few days. It became apparent that no one had seen Thomas and Eileen for quite some time. Moreover, no one could recall if they had even come ashore. Each tourist had been busy with their own activities. The crew insisted that they had counted everyone before heading to shore, but perhaps they had counted the same couple twice. However, some tourists pointed out they hadn't noticed any counting at all, at least not out loud. The discovery of the weight belt was also mentioned. The search. Things were looking bad. To organize a large-scale search, the police called for triple reinforcements. 17 planes and 2 helicopters were dispatched. The Coast Guard, several private boats, and concerned citizens all joined the search effort. The area where the tourists had been left was scoured thoroughly. Over time, the search zone shifted. In 2 days, the current had carried the couple far away. Throughout all of this, Port Douglas was in an uproar. Everyone was shocked by the incident, holding out hope for a positive outcome. However, many understood that the chances of rescue after such a long period of inactivity were slim to none. The company that had organized the excursion realized the gravity of the situation and prepared to bear responsibility. The boat's crew knew they had been outrageously careless and negligent. Nothing could justify it. The large-scale search lasted 5 days. Continuing beyond that seemed pointless. By this time, anything could have happened to the couple. In the end, they could have died from dehydration or been attacked. The evidence. Supporting this, on February 5, 1998, a buoyancy compensator washed ashore near Indian Head, more than 100 miles north of Port Douglas. It was found to contain a tag with the name Thomas Lonergan. Interestingly, no bite marks from predators were found on it. This is when the case of the couple's disappearance became more convoluted. Shortly after, Eileen's wetsuit and a second buoyancy compensator presumed to be hers were also found. The wetsuit had cuts on it, leading some to suspect they were caused by shark teeth. However, if that had been the case, it's unlikely that anything would have been left of the suit. Later, forensic experts determined the tears were caused by coral. The wetsuit had even accumulated barnacles, indicating it had been in the water for quite some time. Forensic specialists suggested the wetsuit had been submerged since January 26th, the day after the described events. It's possible that, under the scorching sun and heat, combined with a lack of water, Eileen began experiencing delirium, causing her to remove her suit, which would have compromised her ability to stay afloat. Later, diving weights and oxygen tanks were found, some still containing air. However, none of the discovered items provided evidence of death caused by marine predators. What was clear was that the couple didn't have enough time for anyone to find them alive. On February 14th, the search for the missing couple was officially called off. 3 weeks is more than enough time for human bodies to be entirely consumed by the open ocean. According to all biological and anatomical principles, the Lonergans couldn't have survived unless they had been picked up by another boat. But if that were the case, they would have made contact. The last message. 6 months later, a diving slate belonging to the couple was found 160 miles from where the tourists had disappeared. This specialized slate is used for underwater communication and note-taking. Thanks to it, we now know how long Thomas and Eileen remained alive. On one side of the slate, the message read, Monday, January 26, 1998, 8 a.m. To anyone who can help us, we were left behind at Agincourt Reef on January 25, 1998 at 3 p.m. Please help us. Send assistance before we die. SOS! The couple realized they were on the verge of death and used every possible means to save themselves, even the smallest chance. On October 10, 1998, police officer Noel Noonan made an official statement. Authorities believed that the missing man and woman likely passed away between 8 a.m. on January 26th and February 2nd. Most likely, their death resulted from dehydration or drowning. After being exposed to the hot sun for an extended period without water, they became exhausted and disoriented. The divers voluntarily shed their heavy gear, which had been keeping them afloat. One thing was clear in this situation. They were unlikely to have been eaten. The couple's family members were devastated by the loss. Their deaths seemed senseless and avoidable. Thomas and Eileen were young, with their whole lives ahead of them. But the crew's negligence proved fatal. A professional company, which had maintained a good reputation for years, failed to follow basic safety protocols. Justice. When it came time to face justice, Jeffrey Nairn, captain of the Outer Edge, stood trial for manslaughter. He was responsible for ensuring safety on board. The defendant swore that he had instructed one of the crew members to perform a head count after the final dive, but the crew member made an unforgivable mistake. Allegedly, 2 tourists were counted twice because they had gone for a swim after surfacing. Thanks to the defense's efforts, the Australian Supreme Court acquitted the boat captain in 1999. The defense attorney presented entries from the couple's diaries, which suggested they had grown weary of life, having seen and experienced everything, and wanted to depart voluntarily while they were still young. The relatives of the missing couple argued that Thomas had likely been in a depressed state when he wrote those entries, but that didn't mean he would have taken such a drastic step. Moreover, the couple would never have put others at risk of legal trouble. They were members of the Peace Corps, known for their compassion and sense of responsibility. It was also revealed that Thomas's words had been taken out of context, but the case was not reopened on those grounds. As for the diving company, it suffered an inevitable collapse. Its reputation could not be restored. Following the court's ruling, a massive fine was imposed on the company. The financial burden was too great, and the management declared bankruptcy. Was this justice? One way or another, the beautiful couple could never be brought back. They had been left to face a horrific death in open waters. To this day, their bodies have not been found. Version 1. Perhaps the court's verdict was influenced by the speculation surrounding the missing couple. By the end of 1998, unexpected theories about what had happened began to surface in the media. It started to seem as if the tragic story had a secret motive, or perhaps the press was simply trying to create that illusion. One of the most popular theories was that it was a voluntary departure from life. The idea was that one spouse deprived the other of life, and then ended his own. This theory was seemingly supported by the personal diaries of the Lonergans. The claim was that their deaths were not due to negligence but were part of a carefully planned act by Thomas and Eileen. In support of this, personal writings were cited. 6 months before the event, Thomas wrote, "Like a student who has passed an exam, I think my life is wonderful and I'm ready to die. From what I can tell, my life can only go downhill from here. I've reached my peak and everything is going down." Eileen's thoughts were no less alarming. It was believed that she knew of her husband's desires and was willing to share them. A few weeks before the underwater excursion to the Great Barrier Reef, she wrote, "Tom wants to die a sharp and clear death, and he wants it to happen soon. He's not prone to ending his own life, but he has the desire to die, and I can support him in that." The theory suggests that the couple may have chosen this unusual method because both loved diving. There was something almost mystical about the idea of dying in a place where coral reefs were slowly dying as well. However, the couple's relatives didn't agree with this version. They were convinced that Thomas and Eileen wanted to live, which is why they had planned a vacation after their long mission. In addition, they had recently talked about having children. While they hadn't rushed into parenthood before, they had come to the realization that life would be more joyful with a child. They wanted to continue their family line and pass down their knowledge. It also came to light that journalists had used the couple's diary entries without regard for context, presenting speculation as fact. The spouse's words were twisted and misinterpreted. Version 2. Others believe that the Lonergans' deaths were staged. American researchers Hugh Merchan and Audrey Lindock, who investigated the case, supported this theory. They believed that Thomas and Eileen intended for their diary entries to be found and published. After all, how else would they have ended up in the media? It was revealed that the couple had financial problems that could have resulted in long prison sentences. The theory is that the couple never intended to return home after their trip, choosing instead to escape punishment. It is possible they were picked up by another boat, which had been hired for this purpose. Additionally, there were reports from people claiming to have seen the missing couple. Given the story's notoriety, their faces were recognizable to many. Over the years, police received multiple reports from eyewitnesses who said they had seen the Lonergans alive and well. However, after investigation, these reports turned out to be false. Some were not taken seriously at all. It was also established that since their disappearance, the couple's bank accounts had remained untouched, despite containing substantial sums of money. Sad conclusion. Officially, Thomas and Eileen are still considered missing. Their story served as the basis for the film Open Water, made in 2003 by a married couple who spent about $120,000 bringing the real-life events to the screen. The film helps viewers understand what the couple may have felt in such a dire situation. Each viewer can put themselves in their shoes and feel the helplessness that a person experiences when faced with the elements and predatory animals. The film touches on human negligence in many ways. Even in the final scenes, when fishermen find a scuba camera inside a shark's stomach belonging to the couple, the focus is on their indifference. One of them says, "I wonder if this thing works." Yet no one questions how it got there or what happened to its owner. Just as the crew of The Outer Edge had been careless with their duties, failing to notice the couple's personal belongings left behind. If everyone had done their job properly, the tragedy could have been avoided. Despite the different theories, it's most likely that Thomas and Eileen met their end. They were doomed to a slow and agonizing death. The only positive outcome of this entire situation was the tightening of safety measures in diving operations and the mandatory name-by-name headcount of divers on boats. Terrible consequences, a monstrous lesson. Imagine a quiet, peaceful life in a small town where everyone knows each other and evening strolls feel safe and familiar. But what if behind the walls of a house you pass by every day, something dark is hiding? What if the person everyone thought was kind and predictable suddenly vanishes without a trace and her own home becomes her final resting place? Gloria Gary was a woman whose life revolved around books, mysteries, and novels. She lived in solitude, and it seemed like the only thing that truly mattered to her were the characters in her favorite stories. But one day, she simply disappeared. 9 days had passed since she was last seen. Her family and the police searched her home, every room, the attic, and the basement, but found nothing. How could this be? How does someone vanish from their own home? Now imagine that just days after her disappearance, a young man is found, and he admits to having been in Gloria's house. He claims that her body is there, but no one can find it. Where did it go? And how could a young man who appears so innocent and on the verge of tears during questioning be involved in such a terrifying crime? Are you ready to dive deeper into this story? This tale will challenge everything you think is safe. Prepare yourself. Darkness often hides where you least expect it. A red Honda was parked on a deserted highway in northern Utah, catching the attention of the few cars that passed by. One driver, noticing that it hadn't moved, didn't approach but immediately called emergency services, suspecting the driver might be in trouble. The area was remote, surrounded by fields and farms, and there wasn't a soul in sight. When the officer arrived at the scene, he saw the lone car parked on the shoulder and cautiously approached it, leaving his patrol car with the lights flashing behind him. As soon as he got close, the door of the Honda swung open, and out stepped a young man holding a gas can. He looked quite young, though his ID showed he was already 22. The young man explained that he had run out of gas and didn't have money to refuel, so he was just waiting, hoping someone would stop and share some fuel. While checking the car's registration, the officer noticed something odd. The car belonged to a 40-year-old woman named Gloria Gary, who had been reported missing for several days. This fact raised the officer's suspicion, and he took the young man, named Kyle Jepson, to the station for questioning. Jepson claimed he knew where Gloria was, but his statements seemed strange. He insisted that she was still in her house, even though her family had already searched every corner and found nothing. It felt like Kyle was hiding something, and the police had to figure out what that was. The story of Gloria's disappearance began several days earlier, on January 3rd, when she was last seen. She had left work at Urban Daily, stopped by a local pizzeria to grab some takeout, and headed home. But the next day she didn't show up for work. Her colleagues initially joked that Gloria must have overslept, which was extremely unusual for her. However, when no one had seen her by evening, a growing sense of unease began to spread. Something was wrong. On January 4th, Gloria was supposed to meet her family for dinner, but she never arrived. She wasn't answering her phone, and her relatives started to worry. But it wasn't until January 5th, when she missed work again and no one could reach her, that her family and co-workers became alarmed. They knew Gloria as a reliable and punctual person, someone who always stuck to her schedule and never disappeared without warning. The police immediately began a search. Her family checked her home but found no trace of her. Everything pointed to Gloria having vanished without leaving a single clue. Neighbors described her as a quiet, polite woman who always lived by the rules and never drew attention to herself. She was a devoted aunt to her nieces, a loving daughter and sister, and someone for whom routine and planning were essential. Yet despite her seemingly perfect life, no one could explain what had happened or why she had gone missing. When the police found her car abandoned on the side of a highway, hundreds of miles from her home, the mystery only deepened. What had taken Gloria so far away from the life she knew? Meanwhile, at the police station, Kyle maintained that Gloria was still at her house. But this contradicted all the evidence they had. Officers began to suspect that Kyle was either hiding something or possibly involved in her disappearance. How could a woman whose life was so meticulously organized simply vanish without leaving a single clue? Each day, it became harder to believe that all of this had happened to a woman who lived such a simple, predictable life. Gloria was described as having black hair and brown eyes, often wearing glasses with thin frames. She was last seen in a long dark sweater and pants. Her bright red Honda was also noted, as its vibrant color made it stand out. Gloria's family was not idle. They began spreading the word about her disappearance through social media and local news outlets, handing out flyers with her photo, and creating a dedicated account for tips from those who didn't want to involve the police. They were doing everything they could, hoping for a miracle. But deep down, they were preparing for the worst. Their efforts paid off. A few days later, Gloria's red Honda was spotted in southern Utah, in a small town called Pound. Around noon on January 12th, local officers patrolling the area noticed the car parked at a convenience store. They checked the license plate and confirmed it was the missing vehicle. However, when the patrol returned to investigate further, the car was gone. Realizing they had missed an important lead, the officers reviewed the store's security footage. They managed to capture a glimpse of a man driving the car. The video quality was poor, but it was clear he had some dark markings on his arm that resembled either a glove or a tattoo. When Gloria's family saw the images of the suspect, they were baffled. None of them knew anyone in Utah, adding another layer of mystery. Determined to act quickly, the police circulated photos of the man on social media, putting out an alert for his identification. The very next day, January 13th, luck finally turned in favor of the investigation. A passing driver spotted the red Honda parked on a rural road and called the police to report the vehicle. Soon, a patrol was dispatched to the scene. Upon arrival, the officer noticed that the car's windows were fogged, as if someone had been inside for a while. The body of the car had been partially spray-painted black, and the passenger window was broken and taped up. The officer immediately relayed the license plate number to dispatch and approached the vehicle for a closer look. At that moment, the door opened, and a young man emerged, holding a gas can, pretending everything was under control. The young man claimed that he had run out of gas and told a story about waiting for help. His hands were covered in black paint, which raised suspicion. The officer noticed this and asked why the passenger window was taped up. The young man, looking flustered, gave a shaky explanation about breaking it in a fit of anger with a machete. Not convinced, the officer requested that he step out of the vehicle for a search. When the patrol officer searched the young man and found no weapons, he placed him in the back seat of the patrol car and drove him to the station. Meanwhile, a radio dispatch revealed that the Honda belonged to a missing woman from Iowa. The officer asked the young man who owned the car, and he insisted it belonged to his aunt. However, when asked her name, he couldn't remember. Realizing his lie had failed, the young man confessed to stealing the car. He explained that he had noticed it parked in a driveway and decided to take advantage of the situation. Utah police, having obtained a search warrant for the red Honda found on the highway, immediately began a thorough examination. What they found inside looked like a collection of items for someone planning an extended trip or escape: a tent, toothbrushes, men's clothing, blankets, spray paint, and tape. Everything suggested that the young driver, Kyle Jepson, was preparing to go into hiding and spend time away from civilization. When Kyle was brought into the station, he acted strangely. Initially, he agreed to talk without a lawyer, but then, visibly anxious, changed his mind. Detectives quickly discovered that Jepson had an outstanding warrant in Iowa for burglary. At first, it seemed he was just a car thief who had fled his home state, but his nervous demeanor put the officers on high alert. When they asked him about Gloria Gary, the owner of the Honda, his response shocked everyone. Kyle unexpectedly admitted that he had seen Gloria. Moreover, he claimed that she was still in her home. But then, as if reconsidering, he fell silent and refused to elaborate further. Only after some time, when the detectives pressed for clarification, did Jepson gather his thoughts and say that Gloria was dead and her body was still in the house. The officer, who had come merely to check on a vehicle, suddenly found himself entangled in a serious investigation. Detectives in Iowa, having received this information, contacted the police in Utah. When Kyle was brought in for questioning, his confessions were even more chilling than investigators had anticipated. He admitted that on January 3rd, he had no intention of harming anyone. He had simply been wandering the streets of Des Moines when he stumbled upon Gloria's house. According to him, it was a chance encounter that led him there. He broke in and hid, waiting for the homeowner to return. When Gloria came home carrying a pizza box, she had no idea that an intruder was lurking inside. Kyle attacked her, knocking her to the floor. Fear and rage were evident in his eyes. He choked her and didn't let go until she went quiet. At first, he thought she had merely passed out, but then he realized Gloria was no longer breathing. What happened next was even more shocking. Kyle violated her in an attempt to regain a sense of control that he so desperately craved. Kyle described his actions with an unsettling detachment, insisting that at that moment he felt as if he were watching himself from outside, as if it wasn't really him. He claimed everything felt unreal, and despite the gravity of his actions, he felt no remorse. After the crime, Kyle stayed in Gloria's house. He didn't try to flee right away. Instead, he acted as if nothing had happened. He took a shower, watched TV, and even sent a few messages and photos to his friends on Snapchat. He didn't specify what was in those photos, but some of his friends began to express concern. After spending a few days in the house, Kyle decided to take $200 in cash that he found and steal Gloria's red Honda, setting off on a journey through several states. Throughout this time, despite his confession, he attempted to convey the impression that he didn't fully grasp the seriousness of what he had done. He was apprehended, arrested, and placed in a detention center in Utah while awaiting extradition to Iowa. However, one question remained. If Gloria was truly dead, where was her body? Gloria's family, who had reported her missing, had searched her house several times without finding any clues. Even after the investigation began, Iowa detectives visited the house to inspect the premises, but without a warrant. They had no authority to force open doors or search locked spaces like the attic, basement, or closets. They could only walk through the main rooms, visually inspecting the house. When Kyle claimed that Gloria's body was still in the house, the police had many questions. Why didn't her family or the officers themselves find anything suspicious during the search? And if Kyle was telling the truth, why had the body not been found? These questions demanded immediate answers, and a warrant for a full-blown search of the house was promptly executed. When Gloria Gary went missing, her family didn't know what to think. It had been 9 days since she disappeared, and any hope for her well-being was fading. But Kyle Jepson's unexpected admission that he had left her body in the house caused police to refocus their efforts on the investigation. Authorities had finally obtained a full search warrant for the house, and now, armed with that document, they could proceed without restraint. When detectives re-entered Gloria's home, they began examining every room, attic, and basement. It turned out that Gloria suffered from hoarding syndrome and her home was cluttered, making the search difficult. In every corner were boxes, old magazines, and items she hadn't used in a long time. Police officers, picking their way through this chaos, finally discovered the body. The remains were sent for autopsy, and forensics confirmed the worst. It was indeed Gloria Gary. Police did not disclose the exact location where the body was found, citing the privacy of the deceased, only saying that the body had been hidden quite skillfully amidst the unusual arrangement of the house. The discovery left many questions, and no one could explain how the body could have gone unnoticed for so long. The residents of Des Moines, where Gloria lived, were shocked. Their quiet and safe neighborhood had suddenly become the center of a sinister story. Des Moines, a major transportation and financial center in Iowa, was known for its safety. But 2017 brought a wave of violence to the city. In the first few days of the year, several homicides were reported at once. What made the incidents particularly disturbing was that they occurred in previously safe neighborhoods like Merrill Hay, where Gloria lived. Residents began installing security systems and fearing for their lives, and it all started with Kyle Jepson. As it later turned out, it wasn't the first time Kyle had been on the police's radar. 5 days before Gloria's death, on December 29, 2016, he broke into the home of Lissi Taylor, a woman who lived on Holcomb Avenue. When Taylor returned from work at 8:30 p.m., she caught Jepson in her kitchen. The young man was dressed in her underwear and wig, and on the table was her food and wine, which he had eaten and drunk. Despite the frightening situation, Taylor managed to pull herself together and screamed, demanding that the intruder get out. To her surprise, Jepson complied, throwing his things on the floor and running away. Later, Taylor looked out the window and recognized him as her neighbor's son. She immediately called the police and reported the trespassing. Although Kyle hadn't stolen anything, she was concerned about the young man's strange behavior. The police issued a warrant for his arrest, but Jepson had already gone on the run. The incident shook Taylor and her family. Shortly afterward, she decided to move out of Des Moines, fearing that their home might be targeted again. When word got out about Gloria Gary's death, Taylor realized her fears were not in vain. A few days after her home invasion, Jepson found himself involved in the death of another woman. When Gloria's body was found, Kyle was charged with first-degree murder, as well as theft and burglary. His bail was set at $1 million in cash, but the story didn't end there. It turned into a tragedy for two families at once. On the one hand, the loss of Gloria's family, a woman who lived quietly and modestly, and on the other, a nightmare for Kyle's parents. After learning about the crime committed by their son, they were in a state of shock. Imagine this. You are parents who watched your son grow up, proud of his accomplishments and loving him more than anything. Then one day you find out that this son, your son, has taken another person's life. How do you live with that? How do you find the answer to where you made a mistake? What was the moment when these horrible thoughts started in your son's mind? All indications were that Jepson had been hiding his dark side for a long time. He worked in a pub just 10 minutes from Gloria's house. His co-workers described him as a diligent and friendly guy, but that all changed after he was fired. He became withdrawn and, according to friends, disappeared from view more and more often. When Gloria's family was handing out flyers with her picture on them, they went to the very pub where Jepson had once worked and asked for her picture to be put up in a prominent place. One of the employees taped it to a window pane. This seemingly ordinary act later shocked everyone when it was revealed that it was the former employee of the establishment who turned out to be the culprit. Gloria's family could not believe that their loved one had been killed by someone who was very close by. The pub staff were equally shocked when they found out that their former colleague, someone they once shared shifts and conversations with, turned out to be a criminal. No one could believe that Kyle, who had always seemed like an ordinary guy, was capable of such an act. The legal proceedings, which concluded in September 2017, marked the final chapter in a case that shook the entire city of Des Moines and its surroundings. Kyle Jepson, a 22-year-old offender, agreed to a plea deal to avoid a harsher sentence. This took time, as his lawyers attempted to use the intimate nature of his actions against Gloria Gary and Alicia Taylor as mitigating circumstances, but the court was unyielding. Gloria was someone everyone spoke of with kindness and respect, and her elderly father couldn't bring himself to attend the trial. He refused to face the person responsible for taking his only daughter from him. Jepson, on the other hand, tried to explain his behavior, claiming that certain demons had taken over his mind, making him lose control of his actions. However, his tears during the trial didn't move the judge or anyone else present. A psychiatric evaluation found no mental illness. He was declared fully competent. The sentence handed down by the court was severe. Jepson received 50 years for the crime against Gloria Gary, along with an additional 10 years for the break-in at Taylor's home. The judge ordered that the sentences be served consecutively, meaning Jepson would have to serve at least 35 years before being eligible for parole. The public was satisfied with the court's decision, but lingering questions remained. One such question was how Gloria's body, which had been in her home, went unnoticed for more than 9 days. Even though her family and the police had searched the house, authorities declined to comment, citing respect for the family's privacy. However, some details emerged through interviews with Gloria's relatives. It was revealed that Gloria had been dealing with hoarding tendencies. Her love for books, novels, and mystery thrillers had taken over her home. When she ran out of space on her shelves, she began stacking them on windowsills, tables, and eventually on the floor. Over time, her home became a maze of books, making it nearly impossible to find anything. After her death, Jepson simply covered her body with these books, concealing it under layers of paperbacks and hardcovers. It turned out that the very world of books she cherished became her final resting place, and that's why her family, unaware of where to look, had passed by without realizing. Gloria Gary was a humble and kind-hearted person who simply loved to escape into the world of her books. She didn't deserve such a tragic end. Her home was a sanctuary of comfort and peace, but as this heartbreaking story reveals, even the most familiar places can turn into scenes of tragedy when faced with human malice. As this narrative comes to a close, I want to pose a question. How far can a person's desire for control and power over another go? Do you think this tragedy could have been prevented? Gloria, lost in her novels like many of us, sought solace and tranquility in the familiar. Yet sometimes what brings us comfort can become a trap. This case serves as a poignant reminder to stay aware of our surroundings and cherish those we love. No one knows when or under what circumstances another life may be cut short. A crime of honor committed by close relatives. A crime of honor is a severe criminal act, typically, but not necessarily, committed against a female family member as punishment for bringing disgrace and dishonor upon the family. The offense is punishable by death at the hands of relatives, can vary across different countries and cultures, but often include marital infidelity and apostasy. Each year, according to official statistics, around 5,000 such crimes occur worldwide. However, various women's rights organizations claim this number is at least 4 times underreported. What is most alarming is that often, the perpetrators face no punishment, and their actions are deemed righteous. Police in countries where such crimes are prevalent simply turn a blind eye to these acts, and although it is claimed that in recent years the penalties for such actions have been intensified, there are no official data to substantiate this. Samia Shahid's case in 2016 shocked the world. She was forcibly married off to a cousin she openly despised and sent to her ancestral homeland. However, she soon broke off this imposed union to marry for love, against her relatives' wishes, and paid the ultimate price for it. Her story drew intense public scrutiny as she was a British citizen of Pakistani descent. Yet she met her tragic end in Pakistan, where the case was quickly suppressed, attempting to frame it as an unfortunate accident. The Shahid family story. Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid and Matiaz Shahid emigrated to the UK in the mid-1980s from a small Pakistani village named Pandori, located in the Jhelum district of Punjab province. They moved to a foreign land in search of a better life to escape the poverty they lived in back home. In November 1987, their eldest daughter, Sami, was born in the English city of Bradford, located in West Yorkshire, and a few years later, her younger sister Mita was born. The head of the family established his own business renting cars, which later focused on renting luxury vehicles, including high-end limousines. As his business prospered, he helped two of his brothers and their families also move from Pakistan and settle in the UK. The relatives also opened and successfully developed their businesses. One brother had his own seafood shop chain by the early 2000s, and the other opened a flower delivery and floristry company. Overall, the Shahid family was quite well known and successful in Bradford, being quite wealthy and influential. Sisters Sami and Mita were born and raised in the UK, but their family strictly adhered to the laws and traditions of their ancestral country, so the girls grew up under the influence of a mix of European and Pakistani cultures and customs. The liberal English views and manners starkly contrasted with the strict orders of their ancestors' country. For example, the girls were not allowed to drive a car, and all their contacts and movements were strictly monitored by their father. The elder daughter, Sami, was the apple of Chaudhry Mohammed's eye and was considered daddy's girl. He indulged her in every way, buying her expensive outfits and jewelry, and paid for her education at one of the most prestigious universities. She meticulously cared for her appearance, used cosmetics from well-known brands, visited beauty salons, and spent extravagant amounts of money there. Meanwhile, she worked part-time at a post office, essentially supported by her father who paid for all her whims and desires. Frequently, Sami, without her family knowing, would rent a car and drive herself. She loved driving, felt confident behind the wheel, and did not understand why Pakistani traditions forbade women from doing so. She was headstrong and freedom-loving, but she tried not to upset her parents, doing everything as they said. Shahid had many friends from school and university in England with whom she kept in touch. She was characterized as a bright, kind, and cheerful person. Forced marriage. Despite living a life filled with love and abundance and seemingly having everything she wanted, the woman was deprived of the opportunity to make any decisions independently. She constantly lived with an eye towards her parents and elder family members' opinions, from whom she needed constant approval for her actions. More than anything, Sami feared upsetting her father, whom she adored. However, numerous prohibitions, fears, and strict orders meant she was never truly honest with her family. In 2012, her parents decided it was time for their eldest daughter to settle down, get married, start her own family, and have children. They insisted that she go to Pakistan and enter into a marriage in accordance with all the rules and cultural traditions. They chose her cousin, Chaudhry Mohammed Shakil, whom she barely knew, as her groom. It's worth noting that marriages between relatives and arranged marriages are quite common, although not a strict requirement in Sunni Islam, but the tradition is honored to this day. Sami knew that sooner or later her parents would choose a husband for her and present it as a fait accompli, leaving her with no choice in the matter. She was prepared for this, understanding the inevitability of such a marriage, but her father's choice was truly shocking to her. Shakil was openly distasteful to her, even causing her some repulsion. Additionally, he had recently been released from prison where he served time for ending someone's life over a land dispute. Since childhood, Sami occasionally interacted with Shakil as if he were a brother, but she could never imagine him as her spouse. Notably, her own parents were also cousins whose marriage was arranged by relatives, but they managed to genuinely fall in love and build a happy family. Her parents believed that their daughter would experience the same fate and that she and Chaudhry would eventually fall in love. Despite her aversion to the groom, Sami could not disobey her father and understood how important this was to her family. However, her mother and younger sister Mita later claimed that no one forced her into the marriage, and given her complex and headstrong character, it would have been impossible to do so physically or morally. She married voluntarily, without any coercion. In early February 2012, the decision about the upcoming wedding was finalized at a family council. The following couple of weeks, her parents and aunt and uncle, future in-laws, took the bride shopping, where she chose everything she liked, and they paid for expensive outfits, jewelry, accessories, cosmetics, and so on. Samia was denied nothing, but it all seemed as if she was being purchased. Likely that was indeed the case. The bride pretended to be caught up in the wedding preparations, but inwardly she felt like a hostage. She already understood that this marriage would not bring her happiness, but would be a real punishment. However, she could only discuss this with her friends, not her family. At home, she needed to appear happy, discuss the details of the upcoming celebration, and prepare for her departure to Pakistan. On February 20th, 2012, the young woman boarded a plane and, while in the cabin, sent a message to a close friend saying she was flying thousands of miles to make the biggest mistake of her life, but she had no choice. Later, she sent several more messages in which she confessed that the mere sight of the groom made her nauseous, and she could not stand to be near him. On February 27th, a lavish wedding was held for Samia and Chaudhry in Pandori, attended by about 1,000 people. The celebration lasted 4 days, and as a wedding gift, her parents presented the newlyweds with their own luxurious 2-story house, located next to their family home in the same province of Pandori. However, the young woman understood that this rich and beautiful house would become a real prison for her, where she would be forced to live with a man she did not love. Return to the United Kingdom. Family life, predictably, did not bring Samia happiness. She still detested her now lawful husband and realized she could neither love this man nor even grow accustomed to him. But 4 months later, in mid-June 2012, the young woman returned to her native Bradford to sort out some issues and help her husband with the immigration documents for obtaining British citizenship. She was supposed to apply for a spousal visa for Shaquille, but she was in no hurry with this, enjoying the illusion of freedom and the opportunity to not see her unloved husband for some time. When Samia finally started processing the documents, she learned that their wedding ceremony, conducted according to all the canons of Sharia, was just a marriage contract between Muslims, but had no legal force in the United Kingdom. To recognize such a marriage, certain measures under European laws were necessary, namely conducting a civil ceremony and obtaining an official document, a marriage certificate. Friends of Samia noticed changes in her character and behavior after returning from Pakistan. The young woman appeared sad. Her eyes seemed extinguished. She was no longer the joyful and sociable person she used to be, and she clearly harbored deep resentment towards her parents. Any conversations or mentions of her husband and family life provoked irritation and anger in her. The issue was that Shackle was very jealous and tormented his wife, even from another country. He constantly called her and could demand at any time that she video chat with him. This was how the man controlled where his wife was, what she was doing, and who was with her. Moreover, this was, in a way, a demonstration of the husband's superiority and his power over the woman. In early August of the same year, during a phone conversation with a close friend, Samia confessed that her nerves were giving out. She was completely drained and no longer wanted to live because she had lost any joy, hope for happiness, and a bright future. She said she detested Chaudhry with all her soul and never wanted to see him again. However, she could not say this to her relatives. They only went around telling everyone about the luxurious wedding they had arranged for their eldest daughter. The very man. In early September, without having resolved the issues with the spousal visa, Samia was forced to return to Pakistan to her unloved husband. She regularly wrote to friends about how miserable she was, how much she hated her marriage, and how she felt trapped with no way out. This continued for several months, but then she began to complain less frequently, and her mood changed. During her next visit to the United Kingdom, it became clear what had caused this change. It turned out that she had met a young man online, Syed Mukhtar Kazim, who, like her, was a British citizen of Pakistani origin. He was born and raised in London but had been working and living in the United Arab Emirates for the last few years. The pair started corresponding and quickly developed romantic feelings. They secretly arranged a meeting, and in October 2013, they saw each other in person for the first time. Samia immediately realized that Syed was the man of her dreams, with whom she wanted to spend the rest of her life. He was kind, caring, attentive, and courted her beautifully. They had a lot in common, but they both understood how dangerous and risky their relationship was. Nevertheless, life only seemed meaningful to the young people when they were together. She openly told her beloved about the situation she was in and said she was ready to end her marriage to start anew with Syed. However, she could not get a divorce through a British court because, according to local law, she was not married at all. Divorce and new marriage. In the spring of 2014, Shahid decided to speak with Shakil and asked him for a divorce, but he rudely refused, stating that she would belong to him until the end of her days. Then, during another visit to the United Kingdom to her parents, she secretly contacted a local Islamic Sharia council, reporting that she had been forced into marriage, which was a valid basis for annulling the marriage. She also converted from Sunni to the Shiite branch of Islam, which her new lover belonged to. The cleric contacted the woman's husband to hear his side regarding their marriage, but he again rudely refused to discuss his personal life, stating that he would not give permission for a divorce. After that, the Islamic Sharia Council of the United Kingdom dissolved the marriage, recognizing that Shahid had been coerced into it by family pressure. Sami's family members had no idea that she had divorced her husband in absentia and was preparing to remarry, now to the man she loved. In September 2014, the young woman secretly married her new chosen one. This time, the union had legal force, and the spouses received a certificate of registration of their relationship, confirming its legality. The same cleric who had granted permission to dissolve the bride's previous marriage conducted the nikah religious ceremony. Only a few close friends of the newlyweds, who were present at their wedding, knew about this event. The couple was truly happy. Samia confessed to her friends that she felt like a princess in a fairy tale and couldn't believe that all this was happening in reality. However, this joyous and happy event was the beginning of a real nightmare: family dispute and escape from the country. When Shakil demanded that his wife return to Pakistan, she responded that she no longer belonged to him and presented a certificate of her new marriage. This infuriated the man, who immediately called his father-in-law to inform him of the situation, sparking a severe scandal. The family attempted to coerce her to return to her husband with threats, but she refused, which soon led to severe consequences. A few weeks later, Samia was brutally assaulted on the street while shopping with her sister. Notably, her sister was unharmed, but Samia nearly had her legs broken with metal bars. The police took her statement but failed to find the men responsible for the assault, and the case was quickly dismissed. At this time, Syed had to fly to Dubai for work, leaving his wife in the United Kingdom awaiting a visa to follow him. The wait became a real torment for her, filled with endless threats, disputes with relatives, and fear for her life. Moreover, her parents tried to prove that their daughter's divorce from Shakil was invalid, and even caused a scene with the cleric who had married the lovers. Sami's mother was furious, insulting her daughter and saying that she had disgraced their family and would suffer terrible retribution. In the spring of 2015, Samia finally received her visa and was able to fly to her husband in Dubai. It felt more like an escape, as the young woman feared her family would do everything possible to keep her and forcibly return her to Pakistan. For several months, she kept her passport with friends who also bought her a plane ticket and accompanied her to the airport, a new life. The following year was the happiest in Sami's life. She enjoyed her freedom and the ability to make her own decisions, living with the man she loved, who adored her and was ready to carry her on his hands. Additionally, she could drive a car, something her parents and former husband would never have allowed her to do. In photos posted on social media, Sammy was radiantly happy. She blossomed, looked more beautiful, and it was clear she had achieved what she had always dreamed of. Shahid wanted to become a mother as soon as possible, but sadly, this happiness was not meant to be for her. Nonetheless, she and her husband confidently looked to the future, making plans for their lives, unaware that her closest relatives had already condemned her. Immediately after their daughter's departure, her parents filed a missing persons report with the police, which they later wanted to reclassify as an abduction, accusing Kazim of the crime. The Shahid family members started devising a plan to force the young woman to return by any means necessary, considering various options. Threats no longer worked on her, but they could play on her sympathy. A sinister trap. In June 2016, Sami's parents conveyed tragic news. Her aunt, Shakil's mother, had passed away. Sami was devastated and even considered flying to Pakistan for the funeral, but she was aware of the risks involved. Many family members still hadn't accepted that she had left her unloved husband and remarried. Her actions were viewed as betrayal and disgrace. A week after the aunt's funeral, her mother called again, reporting that her father's health had severely deteriorated. He had diabetes, and his condition had recently become unstable. If he passed away, Sami knew she would never forgive herself if she didn't visit him. Despite her concerns and her husband's attempts to dissuade her, she decided to travel to Pandori. Fearing for her life and safety, she promised her husband to keep in constant contact with him. On July 14, 2016, Shahid arrived in Pakistan and first went to a close friend's house. She left her passport and return ticket to Dubai with her friend, shared her fears, noted her bad premonition, and asked her friend to pray for her safe return to Syed. The following few days passed relatively peacefully. She stayed in touch with her husband and friend, updating them on her movements. She visited her aunt's grave with her family and met with many relatives. She was scheduled to fly back to Dubai on July 21st. However, on July 20th, Sami suddenly stopped making contact. Tragic news. On July 20th, 2016, Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid called the police station to report the tragic death of his daughter. When law enforcement arrived at the house where Sami had lived with her first husband, they found her lifeless body at the bottom of the stairs. Unfortunately, it was too late to help her. There were several visible bruises on her body, which, according to her parents, she sustained from falling down the stairs, and a small amount of pinkish foam was found coming out of her mouth. According to her father, Sami likely had a heart problem, fell, and rolled down the stairs. Since no one was home at the time, she was not assisted promptly, and she passed away. When asked about the whereabouts of the deceased's husband, Chaudhry stated that he had gone out on business. The police found no signs of foul play at the scene and did not open a criminal case, leaving the final determination to the forensic experts. An autopsy was conducted on the same day, yet the pathologist found no signs of violence, and the conclusion was that her death was due to natural causes. She was buried within a few hours of her death. Sami's sudden demise was not considered suspicious and raised no questions, except from her grieving husband. When Kazim was informed of his wife's sudden death from a heart attack, he couldn't believe it. Moreover, the press called the young woman's death a voluntary departure from life due to depression over her inability to have children. However, this version was contested by Shahid's relatives, who claimed she lost consciousness on the stairs and broke her neck while falling. Investigation and the grim truth. Syed Muhtar flew to Pandori on the first available flight and went straight to the police station to report that his wife was deprived of her life by her relatives and former husband. He described the forced marriage and her escape, as well as threats from her family. This information fundamentally changed the case. The authorities recognized it as an honor crime, but the body had already been buried, and the official report stated that Shahid died of natural causes. However, as the deceased was a British citizen, Kazim sought to involve European law enforcement and the media in the investigation. Initially, Sami's father agreed to an interview and tried to portray Syed Muhtar as an imposter and extortionist. However, After the young man produced their marriage certificate, as well as a hard-won copy of the medical report and post-mortem photos of the deceased, an investigation was initiated. The report noted bruises on the deceased's neck and legs and traces of male seminal fluid on her body, indicating that she had intimate relations shortly before her demise. But with whom, if Shaquille was supposedly not at home that day? Kazim held a press conference, presenting all the evidence he had, including text, voice, and video messages from Sami, in which she repeatedly expressed fear for her life. Suspicions arose that the police had been bribed, and the deceased's father and former husband were immediately detained. It turned out they had no intention of letting the young woman return to Dubai. They forcibly brought her to the house given as a wedding gift, where they searched all her belongings for the passport and ticket, which, as mentioned, she had left with a friend. A furious Shaquille, with his father-in-law's tacit approval, physically subdued the young woman, and after she tried to escape, the men caught up with her on the stairs. While the former husband strangled Sami with her scarf, the father held her legs, leaving her no chance of survival. This account was confessed at the station by the perpetrator himself, although Chaudhry Muhammad denied any involvement in the act against his own daughter. Legal proceedings and the fate of the participants. Besides the father and former husband, the deceased's uncle, who had acquired a forged report before the autopsy, and the commissioner who conducted the initial investigation, were also detained. In court, Shaquille recanted his confession, claiming it was made under duress. He spent just over 2 years behind bars but was released on bail in September 2018. In 2019, the man remarried and again attempted to relocate to the United Kingdom, which was unsuccessful. The father of the deceased was in prison from July to December 2016 and was also released on bail. He passed away in January 2018 at the age of 52 due to exacerbated health problems, never admitting guilt or involvement in his daughter's demise. The deceased's uncle and the commissioner were also released in the fall of 2016 without facing any consequences. Soon after, arrest warrants were issued in Pakistan for Mita and Maria Shahid, but the mother and sister of the deceased promptly returned to Bradford. Mita later gave a substantial interview in which she attempted to discredit Sami and her second husband, blaming them for the downfall of the once-happy Shahid family. According to statistics, approximately 30% of violent crimes committed around the world remain unsolved, despite the rapid development of technology and techniques, as well as the creation of extensive DNA databases. As a rule, most of these crimes are solved on hot tracks, but there are cases when the investigation lasts for years or even decades before the perpetrator is punished. But the Ellen Ray Greenberg case, which we will look at in this video, is interesting in that for many years of investigation, it has hardly moved forward. The case has been investigated with numerous irregularities, and over time, there are more questions than answers. The brutal murder of a young woman to this day remains a mystery, and what is remarkable is that the investigation is trying hard to prove that the cheerful Ellen, who was enthusiastically preparing for her own wedding, suddenly decided to leave her life. But let's try to understand everything in order. Who is Ellen Ray Greenberg? Ellen was born in New York in June 1993 in the family of Sanna and George Greenberg. She was the only child of her parents, growing up in love and care. During high school, the girl was actively engaged in team sports and even gave hope as a promising athlete. She was an active, restless, and sociable child, but at the same time studied well, showing a special interest in the humanities. After graduating from high school, Ellen became a student at Pennsylvania State University, where she received a degree in public relations. But having started working on a specialty, Greenberg realized that this is not what she would like to devote her life to. Parallel to work, the girl enrolled in the correspondence department of the Pedagogical Institute. A few years later, she brilliantly defended her diploma and moved to Philadelphia, where she was hired to work in one of the local schools as a junior high school teacher. According to relatives, Ellen's life was going great. She was full of enthusiasm, made big plans for the future, and simply adored her work and small students. At the same time, Ellen met a boy with whom she had a torrid affair, and soon they began to prepare for their wedding. The girl's favorite was a young man named Samuel, or just Sam, Goldberg. He was from a fairly wealthy and well-known family in the city. His parents owned their own large business, and his uncle had a reputation as one of the best lawyers in the state. The young men met in 2009 at a party, thanks to their mutual acquaintances, and immediately liked each other. The friendly interaction quickly turned into a rapidly developing romantic relationship, and soon they decided to move in together and live together. On the eve of 2011, Sam made his beloved a proposal, which was the best gift for the new year. He gave her a beautiful diamond ring, and the couple began to prepare for the upcoming wedding, which was scheduled for the spring of the same year. Family members of both young people took the news with joy, and it seemed that the happiness of lovers can no longer interfere with anything. Ellen plunged headlong into the pleasant troubles associated with the wedding, making lists of guests and sending them invitations, choosing a venue and elements of decor for the event, trying on wedding dresses, trying to create their ideal image, and planning a honeymoon. It is noteworthy that almost all these issues the bride was engaged in independently, and the groom did not visibly participate in the process. But loved ones did not attach much importance to this, and Helen never complained. True, there were some oddities, to which everyone paid attention only after the tragedy occurred. In January 2011, the weather in the city was very snowy and frosty. On the 26th, Ellen went to work at school as usual. But close to noon, there was a strong wind and a blizzard, so classes were canceled and students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to the apartment she and Sam shared. It was in a cozy apartment complex located in one of the quiet areas of the city. Soon Sam returned home as well. According to some reports, the couple that day quarreled, which was mentioned in passing, and Sam himself, but later he began to deny it. Close to 5 p.m., Sam decided to go to the gym located in the same apartment complex. He was gone for less than 1 hour, but when he returned, he could not get into the apartment because the door was locked from the inside. Sam first knocked loudly and insistently, then began calling his fiancée by name, which attracted the attention of neighbors, and then began calling her on the phone and sending messages. No one responded to his yelling, knocking, and calling, but it was heard that the phone was inside the apartment. Sam then went to the first floor of the building to the security guard to ask for help. Samuel explained the situation to him and asked if it was possible to open the front door, to which the guard replied that this was beyond his authority and that he could not leave his post by instruction. Then Sam went back up to his floor and decided to act on his own. He slammed his shoulder into the door, and the first time he did it, he managed to break the latch. It was quiet inside, Ellen's call was never answered, and when he entered the kitchen, he saw a gruesome sight. His fiancée was sitting on the floor, leaning back against the cabinet door, her body slashed with a knife and her clothes stained with blood. Sam immediately started calling emergency services, describing the situation, and when asked to check if the girl had a pulse, he acted strangely, asking several times if he really needed to do that. Then there was silence, and afterward Sam suddenly stated that there was a knife sticking out in his fiancée's chest, which, allegedly, he had not noticed before. He also added that Ellen was obviously already dead. The police officers who arrived on the call were quite surprised, and noted that they had never seen such a thing in their many years of practice. The door was indeed locked from the inside with a latch, which Sam had subsequently knocked off with his shoulder. There were no signs of forced entry or the presence of intruders in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment. All valuables and money were still there. Nothing had been searched or touched. But the most interesting thing began when the body of the dead girl was examined. No signs of struggle or attempts to defend herself were found, as if everything happened suddenly and the victim simply did not have time to react. On her body counted about 24 stab wounds of varying depth, and the final blow came to the heart, and it took Ellen's life. We will return to the blatant negligence with which the crime scene and the body of the deceased were examined a little later. This negligence allowed a lot of evidence to be missed and left a possible perpetrator at large. But even more strange was the behavior of the police, who even before the medical examination thought that Ellen had done this to herself. Panic attacks, visits to a psychologist, and prescription drugs. In favor of the version of voluntary departure from life was the fact that Ellen, since some time, began to suffer from anxiety disorder and panic attacks arising on its background. The situation was so serious that Ellen even sought help from a psychologist. Close, she tried not to complain, so as not to worry them, and relatives in turn associated changes in Ellen's behavior with stress and excitement before the wedding. However, the specialist who worked with Ellen prescribed her 2 medications, which she took regularly to combat her anxiety. As the psychologist himself would later report, neither of these drugs, neither together nor separately, could in any way aggravate Ellen's mental state and cause thoughts of death. The specialist also noted that despite her anxiety, the patient never had such thoughts. In addition, Ellen's friends and colleagues noticed that after she and Sam started living together, her behavior began to change. In addition to becoming anxious and restless, Ellen almost stopped making any decisions on her own. In every situation, Ellen would say that she needed to discuss it with her fiancé, that she couldn't give an answer without consulting him. Similar oddities noticed, and parents of the deceased, but every time her daughter tried to complain to them about her difficult emotional state, she added that Sam had nothing to do with it. And 3 weeks before the tragedy, Ellen told her mother that she wanted to quit school, drop everything, and return to her parents' house. Her mother was very surprised at her daughter's words, but assured her that she could return home at any time, and her parents would accept her without question. However, Ellen never brought up the subject again. Later, it was hypothesized that after the couple moved in together, Sam began to show violence towards his fiancée, and she was scared, afraid to tell anyone about it. The psychologist Ellen consulted did not confirm or deny this version, but noted that Ellen had difficulty articulating and expressing what she was experiencing and what was bothering her. It was as if she wanted to share something important, but the fear was stronger than that. Oddities and inconsistencies in the case. This unusual case from the very beginning raised a lot of questions, but most interestingly, no one even tried to find answers to them. The carelessness with which the examination of the crime scene and the body was conducted, as well as the expertise, is simply astounding. Many circumstances, facts, and evidence were simply ignored and irretrievably lost, and without them it was impossible to restore the full picture of the incident. To begin with, on the hands of the victim, was not found typical for self-defense injuries, which means that the girl was not trying to defend herself. But at the same time, on her body revealed numerous hematomas, which, judging by the degree of healing she received several weeks ago. The fiancé explained that these are most likely the consequences from playing team sports. However, Ellen's parents assured that their daughter had not visited gyms and playgrounds for a very long time because of the workload at work, as well as active preparations for the wedding. No suicide message was found. Ellen looked like a victim of a brutal massacre, but despite this, almost immediately a version of voluntary departure from life was voiced. Moreover, there were food, spices, and a cutting board on the table in the kitchen. So, according to the logic of the investigators, Ellen started to cook dinner, but suddenly changed her mind and decided to cut herself to death with a knife. Further, as I have already noted, on the body of the victim counted 24 penetrating wounds of varying depth, and forensic examinations showed that 10 of them were inflicted from the back, so if the girl was attacked from behind, and some of them were serious enough, and if they did not kill Ellen immediately, then certainly deprived her of the ability to move and resist. It is simply impossible to inflict such injuries on oneself, and then to stick a knife into one's heart to the hilt, and this caused medical experts to doubt the originally announced cause of death. However, despite this conclusion, the investigation continued to insist on the previous version and refused to initiate criminal proceedings. The main argument was the absence of traces of strangers in the apartment, as well as the absence of signs of self-defense. By the way, there were also some doubts about the possibility of penetration into the apartment, because the latch on the inner part of the door was also very peculiar. It could be closed from the outside, but not completely. If the latch had been closed from the inside all the way, it would have been impossible to break it out with a single blow of the shoulder without damaging the doorway. But, judging by the nature of the damage, it was only partially closed, and it could have been done from outside the door. Although the victim's spouse or partner is usually the prime suspect in such cases, Sam has always remained above suspicion. No charges were brought against him, and it was only on the day of the incident that he was interviewed at the station in the presence of his uncle, who, as already mentioned, was a well-known and influential lawyer. Moreover, the whole picture and sequence of events of that day was reconstructed only according to the words of Sam Goldberg, who at times was confused in his own testimony, but wrote everything off as stress. Neighbors confirmed only that they heard the knocking and screaming of a guy who could not get into the apartment and called his fiancée, but that's all. Sam further claimed during his testimony that he went to the security guard for help, and the guard went upstairs with him and saw him kicking down the door. But the guard denied this information, saying that he had not left his post. Strangely enough, but the investigation did not return to this issue, considering this detail irrelevant. A recording from only one surveillance camera leading to the gym was also checked. It shows Sam walking towards the gym and then walking back. But in the interval between these two events, he could well have gone out through another passage and then returned to the gym in the same way. However, his alibi was not checked, and possible witnesses who could confirm that he had been working out or deny it were not even looked for. Sam did not call the police until an hour later, after he found the door locked and his fiancée unresponsive to knocking and shouting. In addition, the officer who took the call noted that Sam was acting strangely. Despite the fact that he was screaming and wailing, the specialist thought that it was a feigned panic because Samuel was calm enough to answer questions and his voice was not shaking. When he was asked to start resuscitative measures, he first doubted the need to do so, then quieted down, and then, and after all, reported about a knife sticking out of his girlfriend's chest, which earlier he allegedly did not notice. It is noteworthy that before calling the police, the guy called his parents and his lawyer uncle, who arrived at the apartment before the police. To the station to testify, as already mentioned, Sam also went together with his uncle. In addition, the next day Sam went back to the sealed apartment with the same uncle to get some personal belongings and took out all of Ellen's gadgets. They took 2 laptops, a phone, and a tablet of the deceased. When the investigation suddenly decided to check these devices a few days later, it turned out that the search queries included topics related to voluntary demise. The police officers who arrived at the scene made only a cursory examination of the scene and concluded that Ellen had taken her own life. Subsequently, despite the emergence of new details, they refused to change their verdict. The order of the wounds could not be established, but it is certain that the final blow was a blow to the heart. The medical examiner who conducted the autopsy found all this very strange, and he decided to conduct his own additional investigation, sending a sample of the spine of the deceased to a highly specialized specialist who could give a conclusion regarding the integrity of the spinal cord. If the spinal cord was damaged, then Ellen would be paralyzed and unable to stab herself in the heart. But soon the expert miraculously changed his mind and abandoned his investigation, stating that according to his report, the spinal cord had not been damaged. However, the conclusion itself was never attached to the case materials. It also didn't bother anyone that with such numerous and extensive wounds on Ellen's body, there was very little blood around, which could indicate that someone had wiped it off. But no one even bothered to look for possible washed-away marks. The luminol used in such cases was simply ignored. The trash cans in the apartment were also not examined, and if there was any evidence in them, they were lost forever. The unhappy parents were informed of the death of their only daughter by the Goldberg family, for they were the first on the scene. Ellen's family lived in another town, a couple 100 miles away from their daughter, but they arrived as quickly as they could. Santa and George couldn't believe what was happening, and flatly denied that Ellen could have taken her own life. But the grief-stricken parents were never given a clear answer to the question of what happened that night with their daughter, only a dry conclusion and refusal to initiate criminal proceedings. Then the Greenbergs decided to conduct their own investigation with the involvement of independent specialists. Soon they were contacted by a private detective who offered his help completely free of charge because he himself wanted to understand this confusing case. The detective studied the materials and came to the conclusion that Ellen's body was moved after her death. This was evidenced by a dried blood trickle from her nose toward her ear. But Ellen was found in a sitting position, so the blood couldn't have traveled that way. He also found smeared stains on the floor, very similar to drag marks. In addition, after a second one, the guard remembered that Sam, who had asked for help, was wearing a tracksuit and said he had come back from the gym, but he was wearing boots. He did not have a bag with a change of shoes with him. But despite the new evidence and witness testimony, the parents of the deceased were again denied a criminal case or further investigation. The Greenbergs were even denied case files, including a recording of Sam's phone call to the police, as well as surveillance footage showing the time he walked toward the gym and then returned from there. 4 years later, a new young officer has joined the county's homicide unit, taking a position as an assistant prosecutor. He had heard about the unsolved, strange case while he was still studying at the university, and now he decided to get materials from the archives and get to the truth. His attention was drawn to the injury to the back of the head, which could be the first to indicate that Ellen had been attacked from behind when she hadn't expected it. Also of interest to him was the note that there was no spinal cord injury, but there was no official document to prove it. All of the ADA's attempts to find any report regarding the spinal injuries were unsuccessful. It was allegedly lost somewhere in the archives. Then he made an official request to the Center of Forensic Medical Examination to get a duplicate of the document. And then it turned out that no one had ever given such a conclusion, and the body was not examined for spinal cord injuries. At the same time, a fragment of the spine had somehow miraculously been preserved and could be re-examined. An independent specialist was brought in and determined that the spinal cord had been damaged in several places at once, so that Ellen could not have inflicted further injuries on herself. The resulting materials were passed to the police, but there, after reviewing them, again refused to initiate criminal proceedings. In 2018, the coroner gave an official conclusion, which stated that all 20 wounds the deceased had inflicted on herself, and there can be no doubt about it. New investigation. Once again, at a stalemate of justice, the grief-stricken parents hired a new attorney with whom they recollected all the documents, previously unrecorded evidence, facts, and witness statements. In 2019, they filed a new lawsuit against the coroner and experts who had improperly done their jobs and effectively collapsed the case. The following spring, the lawsuit was heard and settled, but trials never began due to the pandemic raging around the world. It was expected that the case would be reclassified, but due to the negligence of the police and medical examiners, as well as the resulting confusion, crucial evidence was lost and irretrievably lost. The parents of the dead girl even created a page in the social network dedicated to the progress of the investigation, where they share official materials, new details, and versions. Family, friends, and colleagues of Ellen insist that she could not take her own life, and even do it in such a heinous way. Ellen, in principle, did not tolerate the sight of blood. It made her sick, and she also had a low pain threshold, because of which she has never done tattoos or piercings. In the summer of 2022, the case was dismissed again, but the Greenbergs got it transferred to the district attorney's office, where a new prosecutor took over. The investigation began again, 11 years after those terrible events, but to this day the investigation has never been finalized. How did Sam's fate turn out? For the first year after the tragedy, Samuel tried to keep in touch with his estranged father-in-law and mother-in-law. However, he did not take any part in the investigations initiated by them. He flatly refused to communicate with the police, and it seemed that he was not interested in the case. He himself adhered to the official version that his fiancée himself inflicted fatal injuries. Goldberg soon found solace with another girl, and just a year later married her. Together with his wife, he moved to another state and stopped contact with the Greenberg family. Now he and his wife are raising 2 children together, and about the dead ex-fiancée, Sam tries not to remember. What do you guys think? Is Sam responsible for Ellen's death?
Often the most dangerous manipulators are very eloquent and convincing. They are easily able to put the victim's vigilance to sleep, intimidate and completely subordinate it to their will. Relationships with such a person can carry a serious threat to both mental and physical health. As a rule, the manipulator is looking for a victim full of life, ambition, and energy of a person,
so that in his network often fall even the most intelligent, strong, and independent who simply break, becoming obedient and uncomplaining puppets. Australian stalker from Tinder, as he was nicknamed in the press, hunting for young, successful beauties, which he first conquered with his charisma, intelligence, and appearance, and then turned their lives into a real nightmare. The man's name was Paul Lambert, and he was incredibly attractive, intelligent, seductive, and equally insane. He stalked his victims with manic persistence, tortured, intimidated, maimed, and prepared to kill. The only thing that stopped him was a bullet fired to kill. Early years of Paul Lambert's life. Paul Lambert, née Scales, was born in 1980 on the 10th of August in Brisbane, the largest city and capital of the state of Queensland, Australia. He was the youngest of two children in the family of Margaret and Oliver Scales, and was raised with his older sister, Dorothy. When the boy was not yet 5 years old, his parents divorced. His father left the family and practically stopped communicating with the heirs, although he helped his former wife financially. Soon the man remarried, and in his new marriage he had 2 more children, after which he began to visit Paul and Dorothy, only to congratulate him on his birthday or Christmas, and sometimes called them. The boy missed his father very much, and was very resentful of him for leaving and, as he thought, falling out of love with him and his sister. Already in junior high school, Paul began to have serious problems with behavior and discipline. He became almost uncontrollable and could not control him neither mother nor teachers. The child behaved aggressively towards other children, did not recognize any authority, was impulsive, irritable, and his mood was constantly changing. Concerned, Margaret decided to show her son to a specialist and turned for help to a child psychologist, who diagnosed the boy with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. However, the doctor at that time did not see it as anything terrible, concluding that the problem arose against the background of divorce of parents, and with time, will pass by itself. Allegedly, Paul experienced his father's departure too painfully, which resulted in behavioral problems and difficulties with concentration. A psychologist at the time didn't prescribe any medication for the child, believing he would soon outgrow his neurological behavioral disorder. However, as time passed, the situation only worsened. By the age of 10, the boy became uncontrollable, displaying aggression and unpredictability. His mother decided to seek help again, this time consulting a psychiatrist who not only diagnosed him with ADHD, but also identified several other mental health issues, including bipolar disorder and clear signs of dissociative identity disorder, DID. Commonly known as multiple personality disorder, this condition means the patient's identity is fragmented, leading to the impression that multiple distinct personalities exist within one individual. The boy was prescribed receptor medications, which he was supposed to take under his mother's strict supervision. However, getting him to comply was nearly impossible. He actively avoided taking his medication, convinced he was healthy and had no issues. Nonetheless, while Paul was a child, managing him was easier. Margaret insisted on treatment that seemed to help, and for several years, the problem was forgotten. Paul's mental health struggles did not affect his intelligence or academic abilities. He excelled in school, becoming the top student. He had a knack for the sciences, easily performing complex calculations in his head, and his teachers believed he would succeed in a scientific career. After graduating, he effortlessly enrolled in a prestigious Australian university, earning a master's degree in economics and finance. Upon graduation, he secured a position at the headquarters of a major company in Sydney, quickly rising to lead the finance department. In terms of relationships, Paul had a striking appearance from a young age, and it only became more captivating over time. With masculine features, large expressive eyes, and a strong physique, he made a great first impression. He had many admirers in school, eager to catch his attention. Paul was sociable, easily making friends and often being the life of the party. His mental health issues produced an interesting side effect, a powerful charisma. Everyone considered him a good guy, reliable and respected by his colleagues. When a child of one of his co-workers was diagnosed with cancer, He personally initiated a fundraising effort, providing significant support to the family. As mentioned earlier, Paul was good at making friends and easily started relationships with girls, but they were always short-lived. Before long, he would reveal his true nature, scaring his partners away. His romances typically lasted only a few months, after which he would turn their lives into a nightmare, stalking them, threatening them, lying, manipulating their emotions, and instilling fear. This was just the tip of the iceberg. Notably, he always chose very attractive girls who matched his own model-like appearance. Paul had several favorite methods for manipulating his victims to keep them close. He was highly articulate and persuasive, constantly playing on their sympathy by fabricating terminal illnesses for himself and his loved ones, which made the girls feel guilty for leaving their sick boyfriend. Only his mother and sister truly understood what Paul was really like. While he was a child or a teenager, he was difficult but manageable. His mother insisted on therapy, but as an adult, he completely rejected treatment and psychiatric visits. He achieved his goals through blackmail and threats, with the most effective method being the threat of suicide. Between 2002 and 2016, 6 restraining orders were issued against Paul, forbidding him from contacting or approaching 6 different girlfriends from that period. He stalked each victim for an extended time, poisoning their lives and driving them to the brink of madness. For one of them, he even emigrated to another continent, but was deported and banned from entering the country after she reported him to the police. But let's go through this step by step. First love. While attending university, Paul met a girl named Samantha. They began a romantic relationship, but it didn't last long. He tried to control her every move, manipulating her, pressuring her, stalking her, and completely stripping her of the ability to make her own decisions. It all came to an end after graduation when Samantha stayed in Queensland while Paul, driven by career ambitions, moved to Sydney. Despite the turmoil in their relationship, they continued to stay in touch after their breakup. At the start of their romance, they were both young, and for each of them, it was their first love. Perhaps that's why Samantha hesitated to completely sever their ties. The former couple occasionally called each other, exchanged messages, and interacted on social media. Samantha had no idea about Paul's new relationships. He regularly texted her saying he missed her, couldn't forget her, and hadn't met anyone better. This was, of course, a manipulation. But despite her previous experiences with him, Samantha believed he had changed for the better over the years apart, and that he truly loved her. Attempt to start a family. In January 2014, nearly 10 years after their breakup, the couple rekindled their relationship. Just a month later, Paul proposed, and Samantha happily accepted. They got married on March 2nd of that year. However, the new husband's behavior became troubling just a few weeks into their marriage. Paul began losing control, unable to manage his emotions, and even the smallest things could set him off. He constantly exerted emotional pressure on Samantha, trying to dominate her will. When that didn't work, he resorted to physical violence. When Samantha attempted to leave her tyrant husband, he promised to see a specialist and undergo treatment. She believed him, but it turned out to be just another manipulation tactic. 6 months after their wedding, when tensions reached a breaking point, Samantha brought up the idea of divorce again. This time, Paul promised once more to seek help, but she no longer trusted him. He then suggested they take a trip together to sort out their feelings and think things over. Surprisingly, this idea seemed like a possible solution to Samantha, and she agreed to start planning the trip. In late September 2014, the couple traveled to the other side of the world, to the United States. Paul insisted on visiting Florida, a place he had long wanted to see. Although Samantha preferred Hawaii, she caved under the pressure from her manipulative husband, who always got his way. They renewed their wedding vows on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. However, despite the romantic setting, the event and the trip could not save their marriage. Hunting in Florida. After returning to Australia, Paul insisted they move to Florida, where he had enjoyed his time. Samantha was adamantly against it. She had no intention of relocating to another country or continuing their relationship. Samantha insisted on a divorce, but Paul had no intention of granting it. During this time, he became obsessed with the idea of moving to the U.S., pushing everything else aside. He simply abandoned Samantha, quit his well-paying job, packed his things, and flew to Florida. The girl continued to seek an official divorce, but her husband ignored her efforts. Thanks to his solid savings from years at a big company, Paul was able to indulge himself after relocating to a new country. He rented a spacious apartment in a nice area, regularly hit the gym, bought expensive trendy clothes, and carefully maintained his appearance. Wherever he went, he drew the attention of women, but he was on the hunt for something special: the unfinished divorce. Paul created profiles on several dating sites, showcasing his best photos. Almost immediately, numerous women began messaging him, admiring his looks, and eager to get to know him better. However, he took his time responding until he stumbled upon the profile of Brittany Ann Kill. This 32-year-old blonde was a local news anchor with a truly Hollywood appearance. Brittany caught Paul's attention right away, and he was the first to message her, suggesting they meet up. Without hesitation, she agreed, and they set a date just a day later. Paul charmed her with his charisma, eloquence, and good looks. He didn't just shower her with compliments. He took Brittany to one of the city's best restaurants. Paul made an unforgettable impression on her, so much so that she found herself falling for him on their first date. Brittany thought he was the man of her dreams, possessing all the best qualities, and she excitedly shared this with her best friend. However, Paul viewed her as a prized trophy, something he needed to boost his own ego. This woman was incredibly beautiful, a popular TV personality, and had immense career potential. Paul didn't want to lose her, so he made up some important business to justify flying back to Australia to finalize his divorce. He planned to return to the States right after and propose to Brittany. Samantha was taken aback by Paul's sudden visit, and even more shocked by his frantic desire to end their marriage, especially since he had previously refused to grant her a divorce. Nevertheless, by early 2015, without an official dissolution of their marriage, Paul flew back to Florida, unable to endure the separation from his new obsession. More accurately, he couldn't bear leaving her without his watchful eye. When Brittany accidentally discovered the real reason Paul had gone to Australia, she was shocked and even considered breaking up with him, feeling guilty for the collapse of his marriage. However, Paul managed to convince her that he and his wife had long since separated and that they had mutually decided to end their marriage. He just needed to settle some formalities. Upon his return, Paul immediately went to see Brittany, spinning a sob story about his unhappy first marriage and his search for true love. His words sounded so sincere that just a week later, the couple moved in together. However, Brittany laid down some ground rules, agreeing to give Paul a sort of trial period of 3 months. She believed that during this time they could see if they were truly compatible. Beauty and the Beast. After moving in, it took Paul just a month to reveal his true self and turn Brittany's life into a nightmare. He began to see her as his possession, believing he had the right to dictate her actions and completely control her life. His behavior became erratic, and his actions were unpredictable. It seemed he was battling multiple conflicting personalities within himself, which he couldn't control. Brittany quickly realized that something was seriously wrong with her new partner and tried to end the relationship. For Paul, this was a call to action. He started blaming her, claiming that he had divorced his wife and flown halfway around the world for her. He insisted he had sacrificed everything for her, and she was now destroying his life. He pushed for them to stick to their original plan of living together for at least 3 months, but Brittany packed her things and moved out to another apartment. Trying to escape her unstable boyfriend by moving didn't work. Paul began stalking Brittany, not leaving her alone for a moment. He sent her hundreds of messages daily, called from different numbers, emailed her, and literally followed her everywhere. The tone of his messages fluctuated between love declarations and pleas for forgiveness to threats of self-harm or harm against her. A couple of weeks later, Paul changed tactics. He called Brittany, his voice trembling, and told her that his father had died and he had no one to talk to in the U.S. Brittany's heart softened. She couldn't imagine anyone lying about something so serious. Being kind-hearted and empathetic, she agreed to meet her ex-boyfriend, genuinely wanting to support him, believing he needed to talk and vent. So, playing on her sympathy and manipulating her feelings, Paul managed to maintain a connection with Brittany for a while, making it seem like they were back together. However, he couldn't keep himself together. He became aggressive again, acting erratically and frightening her. When Brittany attempted to break up with him once more, he declared that he wouldn't survive another shock and threatened to harm himself. Brittany was frankly afraid of her inadequate boyfriend, but didn't know how to get rid of him. She gently suggested that he seek help from a psychiatrist, to which Paul replied that psychotherapy and medication will not help him because he was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor, which is growing and is the cause of his breakdowns as well as strange behavior. The pathological liar cried, claiming he was going to die soon, and made the girlfriend promise that she wouldn't leave him while he was alive. The next month and a half turned out to be the most terrible in the life of the popular TV host, because Paul did not give her peace neither at home nor at work. The girl stopped sleeping normally, became anxious, distracted. She had panic attacks, which negatively affected her work and threatened to turn into a complete collapse of her career. Restraining order and deportation. Unable to cope, Brittany simply ran away from Scales, staying with a friend where she thought he wouldn't bother her. But the man changed tactics and began to threaten the girl with the publication of her candid photos, as well as an intimate video, which he filmed without her knowledge. This was the last straw, and the victim finally went to the police, which she also reported to her stalker. In July 2015, the court issued an order prohibiting the stalker from approaching the girl or having any contact with her in any way. But despite this, Paul continued to stalk his victim, writing her threats, blackmailing her, following her. In October of the same year, the man was finally deported from the country, banning him from entering the United States, and Kill was able to breathe a sigh of relief. Back in Australia, Scales, first of all, changed his name to Lambert, his mother's maiden name, so that no one would know about his problems with the law, and then he decided to return his ex-wife, with whom he never had time to divorce. Samantha was horrified to learn of Paul's return and went to the police to ask them to protect her and speed up the process of dissolution of the marriage. First, attempted murder. In February 2016, Paul called his wife and told her that he agreed to give her a divorce, and after convincing her to go to a lawyer together to settle some nuances. Samantha, despite the fact that she knew this dangerous man well, believed him, and was already anticipating how she would receive the long-awaited certificate of divorce. The man picked up the girl in his car, and at first everything went normally. But as soon as they drove away from her house, he first began to beg to give up the divorce and live together again, and, having received a confident refusal, began to insult Samantha and threatened that he would smash the car so that they died together. Paul accelerated the car to a huge speed and almost flew under the truck, moving on the oncoming lane. The girl managed to twist the steering wheel and they drove off the road. Then the man began to beat his wife, but she managed to run out of the cabin and began to call for help. After the incident, Samantha went to court, accusing Paul of kidnapping, bodily harm, and attempted murder. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 10 months in prison, as well as promptly dissolved the marriage and forbidden to approach his ex-wife. Surprisingly, just a month later, the man was released on parole with a probationary period of 1 year. Once free, Paul went to another state, rented a house there, and got a job, but did not notify the authorities. However, every time, in order to check in with the inspector, he flew to the same place, so that no one guessed anything. By the way, Lambert was obliged to visit a psychiatrist, who found him to have much deeper problems than previously thought. He was prescribed medication, which he, of course, did not take. After attending the number of sessions prescribed by the court, the man refused the specialist's help. A new victim. Almost immediately after his release, Paul started a new profile on a dating site, where he soon noticed 28-year-old Angela J., who fascinated him with her attractive, one could say, angelic appearance. It was his type, a graceful, blue-eyed blonde with a dazzling smile and an impeccable figure. The girl worked as a doctor and not so long ago went through a difficult divorce, so she was looking for support and understanding and found a man who almost took her life. However, everything began beautifully and romantically. Paul again turned on all his charm so that the new victim fell into his net. He showered Angela with compliments, took her on dates, seemed attentive, understanding, and sympathetic. After about a month, Lambert's behavior began to change rapidly. He became more and more obsessive and literally followed the girl. Secretly, he made a duplicate key to her house and would come there while Jay was at work. When she guessed about his visits, she decided to break off the relationship, and then, as you can guess, the worst began. Paul first begged her to forgive him and give him another chance. Then he threatened to take his own life, and when he realized it wasn't working, he started threatening Angela. Eventually, he asked her for help as a doctor, and she couldn't refuse. The girl promised that she would help him find a good specialist, and she herself would monitor the course of treatment, which the man seemed quite satisfied. Lambert behaved more and more inadequately and threateningly. He stole Jay's documents and refused to give them back to her, insisting that she go with him. But the girl realized how dangerous it was, and therefore did not make a mistake. She managed to call her sister, who called the police. Paul returned the documents but was given a warning, and then was simply released. Cut him up and tried to burn him alive. That same day, straight from the police station, Paul went to a hardware store where he bought a large kitchen knife, a roll of duct tape, and lighter fluid. Then he rented an inconspicuous car and drove to Angela's house, but he couldn't get in because the girl had changed the locks. He waited for her return from work, lurking near the front door. The girl saw her stalker at the last moment, managed to run into the house, close herself, and called the police. The law enforcers who arrived failed to apprehend Paul because he had escaped by that time. However, he returned a week later, on November 3rd, taking with him a crowbar, which he used to open the back door, and broke into Jay's home while she was at work. When the unsuspecting girl returned, she had barely had time to cross the threshold before she felt a stabbing pain in her shoulder. Angela tried to run, but Paul knocked her down and began stabbing her indiscriminately all over her body. She received more than a dozen stab wounds in the chest and neck area. Her arms were shredded, but the girl continued to fight for her life. Suddenly, the man took out a bottle of lighter fluid and doused the victim, and then took a lighter, which fortunately turned out to be faulty. All the while, Jay continued to scream and call for help. Her desperate cries were overheard by a neighbor who was passing by the house, and he bravely rushed to the rescue, armed with the first stick he could find. He managed to scare off the attacker, who ran away. The man immediately called an ambulance and clamped the bleeding wounds of the girl until the arrival of the medics. Shot like a rabid animal. Despite extensive injuries and heavy blood loss, the victim was saved. Surprisingly, Paul continued to write and call on Angela's phone, even when she was taken to the hospital. He apologized, blamed everything on his alter ego, and promised to get even. The man sent similar messages to his mother, as well as his ex-wife and Jay's parents. On November 4, Lambert called the police and spent several minutes talking about the personalities living inside him, accusing them of all the atrocities. To offers to surrender, he replied that he would rather die, and hung up. However, the police managed to trace the call, and they went on the trail of the criminal. Paul was caught the next morning on a highway off the east coast of Australia and ordered to stop, but he tried to get away from the patrol cars at breakneck speed. Spikes were placed on the road, thanks to which the fugitive's car was stopped. However, Lambert was not going to give up and jumped out, waving a huge knife. To all entreaties to surrender, the man again replied that he would rather die. He behaved aggressively and inadequately, ready to attack the officers who already had him in their sights. At one point, Paul swung a knife and ran at one of the police officers, who was forced to shoot, but one bullet did not stop the intruder. Then several more shots rang out, after which Lambert fell to the pavement and did not move again. Only death could stop the madman. The Lissi family tragedy. What drove a devoted family man to the brink? How can one identify a psychopath? Let's delve into what this term encompasses. Psychopathy is a personality disorder marked by distinctive traits such as a lack of empathy and compassion, emotional shallowness, egocentrism, and a deceitful charm. While not an exhaustive list, these qualities are commonly observed in psychopaths. Such individuals are adept at adapting, skillfully manipulating those around them, and expertly concealing their true nature, often to the extent that even those closest to them may not recognize the potential danger. The Lissi family's story serves as a chilling reminder that someone perceived as a loving and close family member can suddenly morph into a remorseless perpetrator, sparing not even their own children. The man's behavior and his stated motives for committing such a heinous act were so alarming and shocking that they raised questions about his sanity. Yet to everyone's astonishment, a psychiatric evaluation revealed that he was fully aware of his actions and had premeditated the horrific crime. This case shook Italy to its core, particularly the serene province of Mata Visconti, where this tragedy unfolded, marking it as the most notorious crime in the small Milanese suburb's history. Now let's methodically unravel this story and attempt to trace the sequence of events that led to such a tragic conclusion. The tragedy in Mata Visconti. In the early hours of Saturday, June 14, 2014, the quiet town of Mata Visconti was awakened by the desperate cries of a man. Peering out their windows, residents saw their neighbor, 31-year-old Carlo Lissi, calling for help. He appeared frightened and disoriented, mumbling incoherently and pleading for someone to call the police. As people from nearby homes gathered, Carlo revealed that his entire family had been victimized by intruders who had broken into their home, while he had miraculously survived because he was out with friends at a local sports bar, watching the soccer match between Italy and England. He mentioned that everything seemed normal when he left his house earlier that night, but upon returning, he found his home in disarray and the lifeless bodies of his 38-year-old wife, Cristina, their 5-year-old daughter, and their 1.5-year-old son. Neighbors immediately called the police and emergency medical services. While waiting for them to arrive, the operator asked Carlo to check if any of his family members had a pulse and to possibly start CPR if there were any signs of life. To this, he screamed that he wouldn't step inside his house again or touch the bodies. While his behavior could be attributed to shock, it was peculiar that he referred to his family members as bodies even before confirming their demise. Carlo's odd behavior didn't stop there. When police and medical personnel arrived and confirmed the deaths of his wife and children, he barely reacted. He attempted to cry, but only managed contorted facial expressions, with his eyes remaining dry and his face almost indifferent. He struggled to recall the sequence of his actions, gave conflicting statements, but claimed to have recorded the moment he discovered the bodies on his phone's camera. He believed the recording would prove his innocence, but it turned out to be one of the main pieces of evidence against him, among many others. This was the beginning of a high-profile case that was quickly solved. The robbery narrative, strongly advocated by Lissi, was dismissed within hours of the investigation, and he became the prime suspect. As the police uncovered more physical evidence at the scene of the crime and interacted further with Carlo, doubts about his mental health began to emerge. Who was Cristina Lissi? Let's start this narrative by introducing its main characters. Cristina Lissi, born Cristina Omas, came into the world on September 17, 1975, in the small northern Italian town of Pavia, becoming the eldest child in her family. From a young age, she exhibited a strong-willed, independent, and highly ambitious nature, always marching to the beat of her own drum. She possessed leadership qualities and was constantly striving to excel in whatever she undertook, whether it was her schoolwork, performances in the drama club, or any day-to-day activities. Cristina was someone who always had a wide circle of friends, thanks to her excellent organizational skills and the ability to lead. After finishing high school, she was accepted into a prestigious university in Milan and soon moved out of her parents' home to start an independent life. Despite this, she maintained a close relationship with her family, staying in constant touch, and her parents knew they could always rely on their eldest daughter. At the age of 19, while still attending university, Cristina took a job at a branch of a major Italian insurance company located in Mata Visconti. She quickly earned the respect of her superiors and colleagues, and her career was on a fast track to success. Upon graduation, she had a wide array of opportunities before her, but instead of moving to a big city, Olmos chose to stay closer to home in the countryside. By this time, she had already received a promotion at work and assumed a managerial position, becoming a leading specialist in the field of civil insurance. However, even as she grew into an adult and a successful woman, Cristina never gave up her youthful passion for theater. She dedicated all her spare time to rehearsals and performing on stage, particularly enjoying musical productions due to her strong voice and impeccable musical ear. In Mata Visconti, she had her admirers and was sometimes even recognized on the streets. Yet Cristina's personal life didn't seem to fall into place as smoothly. She had many suitors and occasional romances, but most of the men she encountered seemed frivolous, unreliable, and unsuitable for a serious relationship or family life. She held on to the belief that she would eventually find her true love and achieve happiness. Carlo Lissi, the unassuming psychopath. Carlo Lissi entered the world in the fall of 1982 in the Italian commune of Casarano as the eldest of two sons in his family. The family patriarch held conservative views, was quite strict, and even harsh with his children. Carlo's younger brother quickly became the parents' darling, constantly pampered and protected, while they demanded unquestioning obedience, stellar academic performance, and high achievements from their firstborn. From childhood, Carlo strived to meet his parents' expectations, always acting as instructed. He excelled academically, participated in volleyball, a sport his father chose for him despite Carlo's passion for soccer, and never argued with his father, who often stated that his house operated solely on his rules. It was easy to upset or anger their father, who became terrifying when enraged, so Carlo made it a point never to contradict him, always enviously observing his father's and mother's more affectionate treatment towards his younger brother. As a teenager, Carlo became nervous and withdrawn, dreaming of doing something on his own, yet fearing his father's wrath. His fears, internal struggles, and self-doubt affected his relationships with peers. Carlo had almost no friends at school, where he was seen as an uninteresting nerd, often openly bullied without the ability to defend himself, as his father had crushed his self-esteem and suppressed any desire to assert himself. Over time, Carlo learned to adapt and blend in. He avoided conflicts, tried to merge with the crowd, and was superficially polite and kind, even to those he despised. It seemed Carlo had lost his own emotions, or perhaps never had them, laughing or mourning with others, but his emotional responses always remained shallow because he never truly felt those emotions. Another trait of Carlo was his skill in dodging uncomfortable questions. He wasn't a pathological liar, but knew how to prevaricate and evade with such an impassive demeanor that it seemed he was speaking the truth. People who knew Carlo personally later recalled his diminished capacity for empathy. He could be described as callous and indifferent to the troubles and sorrows of others, including those close to him. After finishing school, Lissi enrolled in a prestigious university's economics faculty, chosen by his father, despite Carlo's disinterest in economics or working with numbers. But his opinion was never sought, and he couldn't challenge his father's decision. Thus, Carlo was accustomed to acting against his own interests just to meet others' expectations. Carlo was quite handsome and knew how to use it to his advantage. His youthful sports activities and regular gym visits in adulthood made him even more attractive. Coupled with some charm and superficial charisma, Carlo could be described as a real looker with a dazzling smile and athletic build. People often admired his looks, leading to excessive self-love and clinical narcissism. Lissi easily initiated flings with women, but was incapable of engaging in serious, long-term relationships. First, he tried to avoid any responsibility. Second, he had no interest in making long-term plans. simply going with the flow. And third, his partner soon realized he was emotionally shallow and devoid of real attachment, leading them often to initiate the breakup. Even after university, the young man continued living with his parents, showing no desire to start an independent life, let alone a family of his own. Meanwhile, he secured a job at a leading IT company in Milan. Carlo earned a good salary and faced broad prospects, but remained dissatisfied with his career. However, his parents were overjoyed, and his father seemed proud of his eldest son for the first time, so Carlo was too afraid to disappoint him, preferring to avoid conflicts and criticism. But soon, a good job and career achievements weren't enough. His parents increasingly pressured him to marry and provide them with grandchildren. Aware of his numerous fleeting affairs and his inability to maintain serious relationships, these discussions often led to arguments at home. As Carlo always tried to avoid confrontations, he assured them he would soon find a wife and start a family. Carlo and Christina Lissi, a love story. Carlo first laid eyes on Christina during her performance in a musical play on stage, where he was utterly captivated by her powerful charisma and stunning vocal talent. Despite his immediate fascination, he lacked the courage to approach her after the show. However, fate intervened a few weeks later when mutual friends introduced them. At the time of their meeting, Carlo was only 23, while Christina had already turned 30. Despite the significant age difference, they quickly developed a romantic relationship. Christina, who had previously focused mainly on her career, found herself unexpectedly wanting to build a family and have children with Carlo. He was handsome, career-oriented, and intelligent. Christina perceived his hesitancy, dependency, noticeable selfishness, and some emotional coldness as traits that could be mended. She took the initiative in their relationship, with Carlo compliantly following her lead. Just a few months into the relationship, Omas introduced Carlo to her family. Christina's parents, however, were not pleased with her choice. They saw her suitor as frivolous, with Christina's mother describing him as a child in a man's body. She believed her daughter needed a more emotionally mature partner who could be a reliable support, not this immature young man. Christina, however, disagreed and decided to follow her heart, as she always had. Conversely, Carlo's parents were thrilled with his choice. Christina was seen as an adult, wise, self-sufficient, and accomplished woman who could take care of herself and their indecisive, somewhat irresponsible son. The head of the family, who was not easily pleased, was particularly delighted, convincing Carlo further that he had made the right decision. In quiet waters. About a year after meeting, the young couple moved in together and started actively planning their wedding. Carlo was quiet and compliant, always listening to his fiancée, never contradicting her, and carefully avoiding domestic disputes. Christina made all the decisions while her chosen partner silently supported them. This arrangement suited her perfectly. She was confident that a long and happy life awaited them. However, just before their wedding, Carlo revealed his true nature for the first time, nearly causing them to split. Before the wedding, Carlo's friends threw him a bachelor party in one of Milan's popular nightclubs. They drank, had fun, and were having a great time when a group of women joined them. One of them showed a keen interest in the groom-to-be, trying her best to seduce him. His inebriated friends immediately egged him on, suggesting that a fleeting affair with the stranger would be the perfect adventure to bid farewell to his bachelor life. Without much thought, the guy went off to a hotel with the woman where they spent a passionate night. The next morning, unexpectedly, Carlo confessed his love to the casual lover and promised to leave his fiancée for her. That same day, he confessed everything to Christina, stating he had fallen for someone else and no longer wanted the wedding. Christina handled the news with dignity, packed her belongings, and decided to move back to her parents' house temporarily while finding her own place. But when Carlo's father learned about his son's actions and that the engagement with Christina was broken off by his initiative, he was furious. He declared he didn't want to see his heir until he apologized to the bride-to-be and convinced her to marry him again. Once again, Carlo submitted to his father's will. After buying a huge bouquet of flowers, he headed to the Omas residence. Christina's parents opposed him. They had disliked this peculiar young man even before the news of his infidelity and the broken engagement, and now they certainly didn't want to see him. But the final decision was Christina's to make. After some thought, she decided to forgive her fiancé and give him another chance. The wedding and Mr. Lissi's double life. The wedding took place as planned, and the money gifted by relatives was invested in buying their own home in Mata Visconti. Initially, their marital life seemed quite blissful. Both held high-ranking positions with substantial salaries, affording them not just the necessities, but also travel, entertainment, and more. In 2009, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Julia, and in 2013, Christina gave birth to a son, Gabriel. To the outside world, they appeared as a happy family, full of love and understanding. Carlo seemed to do everything to please his wife, not out of deep love or respect, but rather to avoid disputes. Christina was content with their life together, oblivious to the double life her husband led. At home, he was the exemplary family man, spending time with his wife and kids. Yet in Milan, where Carlo commuted daily for work, he transformed entirely. He frequently engaged in flings and casual encounters, meeting women in cafes, shopping centers, or even on the street. The handsome, stylishly dressed man in his expensive car almost always received reciprocated interest, but these affairs typically ended after a few dates. Carlo enjoyed the control and dominance in these short-term relationships, deciding when to see his next conquest and when to leave her. At home, Christina held the reins, with Carlo merely following her lead. However, rumors of his escapades eventually reached Christina. Each time she confronted him, Carlo swore it was all lies and slander. In 2013, shortly after the birth of their second child, Carlo seriously considered leaving his family for one of his mistresses, to the point of admitting his intentions to his wife. Christina countered with compelling arguments against their separation, particularly highlighting how it would upset his parents. Carlo had no choice but to concede to her reasoning, new love, and a horrific plan to escape marital ties. A year later, in early 2014, a new employee named Maria, young and attractive, joined Carlo's workplace. He fell for her instantly, unable to think of anyone else. He tried everything to catch her attention, giving small gifts, complimenting her, and asking her out repeatedly. However, Maria was clear about not wanting to engage with a married co-worker who had 2 children, but Carlo, persistent in his pursuit, seemed to ignore her protests and didn't think of giving up. Moreover, Carlo began to blame his family for his unhappiness, believing his wife and children were obstacles to his personal joy. He convinced himself he had never been happy in his marriage, or in life for that matter. But with Maria, he imagined he could have the perfect relationship. If only he wasn't bound by his marital ties and responsibilities as a father. The more he dwelled on this thought, the darker his contemplations became. Carlo broached the subject of divorce again, but his wife once more convinced him it was a bad idea, and he found no arguments to counter hers. Frustrated, he started looking online for divorce lawyers, but realized after a few consultations that he would have to surrender half of his assets to Christina and also pay child support. Unwilling to accept such an outcome, he began researching how to end a person's life quickly and without arousing suspicion. Delving into various criminal stories, Carlo stumbled upon an article about an armed robbery that had occurred a few years prior in Mata Visconti. The robbers had fatally stabbed the homeowner before fleeing with the loot, remaining undetected to this day. A monstrous plan took shape in Carlo's mind to recreate a similar robbery scenario, but this time the intended victims would be the mother and children. The last day of the Lissi family. The last day for Christina and the children was Friday, June 13th, 2014. Carlo had the day off and spent it with his family, giving them a farewell party, so to speak. They went to an amusement park together, then went to the mall for shopping, and spent the evening at a popular local cafe. The man did his best to make sure that as many people as possible saw him and his family that day, and everyone noticed how happy they were. After returning home, the couple put the children to bed in their rooms on the second floor and went downstairs to the living room where they made love. It was part of Carlo's cunning plan to avert suspicion. He knew that the examination would establish the fact that he and Christina had consensual intimacy, and who would think that after that a man would suddenly take the life of his wife and children? The woman knew that her husband was going to watch soccer with friends and assumed that he went to get dressed, and she herself settled down in the living room at the TV. But Carlo at that time went to the kitchen, where he took a large knife and stealthily crept up to his wife from behind. He stabbed her in the side of the neck, but Christina not only remained conscious, but also rushed to escape. Apparently, she did not immediately realize who had attacked her, and when she turned around and saw her distraught husband with a knife in his hand, she was shocked. The victim tried to defend herself and dislodged the knife, causing the man's hand to slip and injuring his palm. Despite her efforts, the strength disparity was too great. Carlo continued his assault until Christina showed no signs of life. She died without understanding why her loved one could commit such a horrific act. Then, Carlo went upstairs and cut the throats of his sleeping 5-year-old daughter and his 18-month-old son. Experts later concluded that the children likely did not suffer and probably didn't even wake up. Neighbors, some of whom heard loud screams, did not call the police, thinking the noise quickly subsided. Had they been more vigilant, the children's lives might have been saved. After completing the deed, Carlo clumsily staged a robbery, slightly moving and scattering items, erased his fingerprints from the weapon, cleaned the floor where he had stepped in fresh blood, and then went to a rarely used basement shower to wash off the blood. However, he inexplicably put back on the same underwear, which had small blood splatters unnoticed by him in the moment of the attack. Following this, the perpetrator bandaged his cut hand, dressed up, and casually went to a sports bar to watch football and drink beer with friends. He behaved naturally, and his friends, later testifying in court, could not fathom that he had just committed a triple homicide against his own family. Towards the end of the match, Carlo sent a couple of messages to his wife's phone, updating her on the score and professing his love, adding that he would be home soon. He returned around 3 a.m. and staged a dramatic discovery of the crime, making several critical mistakes. Firstly, he recorded the scene on his phone's camera, intending to create an alibi by pretending to discover the disorder and then the body of his wife, before running outside in panic. His second mistake was failing to turn off the camera, resulting in footage that completely contradicted his alibi and testimony, investigation, and evidence. Carlo's initial claim of a robbery was quickly dismissed in the early hours of the investigation, following the crime scene examination. Doors and windows were intact, indicating that the perpetrator had unrestricted access to the house. Nothing of value, nor anything at all, was missing despite money and Christina's jewelry box being in plain sight. The disorder appeared staged, with items merely toppled or displaced rather than searched through. Most importantly, there was no logical reason for robbers to harm the children sleeping upstairs in their beds. Thus, the case was swiftly reclassified as a deliberate act of ending lives. Carlo, becoming the prime suspect immediately, gave inconsistent statements and couldn't clearly explain the fresh cut on his palm. When he was taken into custody and his clothing was sent for analysis, experts quickly found tiny blood splatters on them. However, Carlo claimed the blood must have come from when he attempted to revive his family members, yet the stains were too small and located on the back of his clothing, suggesting they could only have originated from the knife's motion during the act. Regarding the video Carlo provided to the authorities, it clearly showed that he didn't approach his wife's body to check for a pulse or go upstairs to the children, but ran outside immediately and didn't return. Despite this, he claimed his family was no longer alive and knew for certain all three were ended with a knife. The discovery of a bloodied cloth in the trash, which the culprit used to clean up, was the final piece of damning evidence. A psychopath, but is he sane? After the man was arrested, all his attempts to feign grief ceased. He became calm and unconcerned, and once in his cell, he simply went to sleep. Carlo felt no guilt or remorse, no pity for his own children or his wife, but he continued to insist on his own innocence, despite the fact that all the evidence was against him. A search history had been reconstructed on the killer's seized laptop, giving the investigation an insight into exactly when Lissi began planning to kill his family. There was now no doubt that it was a premeditated crime, but as yet the motive remained unclear. When the man realized that there was no point in denying, he began to confess, telling how exactly he got rid of his loved ones. But the answer to the main question shocked everyone. Explaining the motives for his action, he said that he could not just divorce Christine, because then they would have to share a lot of jointly acquired property, including the house, cars, and the family bank account. And he was not satisfied with this. In addition, there would be a burden in the form of 2 children who would have to pay child support. And all this, according to Carlo, would interfere with their happy life with Maria, for which, in fact, he decided to commit a crime. About all this, the murderer spoke quite calmly and indifferently. That he is a psychopath, no one has no doubt, but it was unclear whether this man is sane. The psychiatric examination established that Lissi was aware of his actions and fully realized what he was doing, but he did not feel any remorse either at the time of the crime or afterwards. In January 2015, Carlo was sentenced to life in prison. He listened to the judge's verdict indifferently, noting only that he thought so. Sometime later, the man tried to file an appeal, but soon withdrew it himself, saying that it was all useless. Finally, Lissi's father died of a heart attack shortly after his son was convicted and sent to prison. He simply could not accept the fact that he had raised a real monster, devoid of a sense of pity and remorse. Kelly Clayton had everything going for her. First of all, she was quite smart and bright since high school. She was a role model for other students, active in school, excelled in tests, and passed exams just as well. At the same time, outwardly, she never looked like a girl who spent days and nights sitting over textbooks, cramming lessons, and writing out something from additional literature. No. On the contrary, her looks were considered model-like, and if her grades had left much to be desired, she could have built a modeling career. She could have, but she didn't. After high school, she went to teacher training university to become a chemistry teacher, the insane pride of her parents, but only for the first few years of university. It is not known what turning point happened to her then, but one day, Kelly took her documents from the institution and, calling her parents, said that she no longer wanted to study, that she was too young to spend the rest of her life checking notebooks and raising ungrateful children. If she wants to, she will definitely return to her educational endeavors. In the meantime, she wants to travel and live life to her heart's content. Not the best idea, according to her parents, who were so upset that they didn't communicate with their daughter for 6 months. But perhaps if it wasn't for this desperate act, Kelly would never have met Tom Clayton. They met at a party of mutual friends and a young man really liked the girl. Firstly, he, from the first minutes of acquaintance, began to court Kelly and show signs of attention. And secondly, Tom had a beautiful appearance and athletic physique. And all because the guy was a hockey star. For 4 consecutive seasons, he played for the semi-professional team Jackals. And in it, he was considered a strongman, a player who was able to break the opponent's ribs, only if he did not approach the gate. But only a sports career, and especially built on strength and aggression, will someday fail, and Tom had to put the stick in the far corner and enjoy hockey only from the stands or from the couch, watching his favorite team on the TV screen. The couple had to move on with their lives, and first they returned to New York, where they got married, then moved to North Carolina, and then moved to the tiny town of Cato, numbering only a few thousand people. There, Tom franchised a company to rebuild houses after fires or disasters, and worked in a related profession for a friend's company. As for Kelly, after dropping out of university, she worked as a waitress, only changing places, and now she had 2 children. However, Tom was earning well enough, and Kelly could quit her job at any time and take care of her beautiful daughters. But she still believed that extra money would never be superfluous. Besides, she could use it to buy toys for her children and spoil them in every possible way. On September 28, 2015, Tom, as usual, went to play poker with his friends the Millers. He never took his wife to such events. Playing for money implied certain skills and experience in the game. Besides, someone had to stay at home with the children, and a family trip would have turned such gatherings into a noisy buffoonery and would not have brought any pleasure from gambling. That evening, Tom was not lucky in the game, but he did not get up from the table, but on the contrary tried to win back and offered anyone who wanted to stay to play until morning, but no one supported him, and he went home. At home, however, a terrible picture opened before him. His beloved wife was lying in her own pool of blood, badly beaten and, at first glance, was not breathing. Tom panicked and ran through the rooms looking for his children, and luckily they were fine but very frightened. He grabbed his daughters and headed through his neighbor Derek's house, trying to make sure the children didn't see their mother's mutilated body, and already from the neighbor's house, he dialed the police number. The officer who arrived on the scene found Tom sitting on his knees in front of his wife's body, trying to give her artificial respiration. Only the EMTs were able to pull the man away, who voiced the terrible and unpleasant information. Kelly had been dead for a long time, and neither they nor he could do anything to help her. All 2 floors of the house were drenched in blood. A major mess was in the bedroom. Apparently, there had been a struggle between Kelly and the perpetrator who had committed his atrocity, despite the fact that there were children in the house at the time. Kelly was pushed down the stairs, evidenced by the knocked-down banister, and beaten on the head with a blunt object until they were sure she was dead. There were no hints of knife or gunshot wounds. The policeman who filmed the crime scene noted to himself that Tom was shocked by what had happened and seemed lost in space. He walked from one corner of the room to another, entered the room for a split second, and immediately left it. And he could not tell the policeman where the children's room was or where the emergency exit from the house was. But when asked where Tom himself was at the time of the murder, he answered calmly that he had been at a friend's house all evening, where they were playing poker. Then the policeman, who did not get any clear information from Tom, went to the neighbors to ask some questions of the children. Tom's eldest daughter, Charlie, referred to the perpetrator as a robber. According to the words of the eldest daughter, she and her sister were almost asleep, but they heard their mother start screaming loudly from the next room, "Charlie, run! Run away from here!" And then the whole place shook like an earthquake. The girls, after listening to their mother, cautiously went out of their room, but saw the criminal leaning over their mother and beating her with what appeared to them to be a hammer. The girls ran back into the nursery, closed the door with a small nightstand, and hid under the bed. It was a good thing. The criminal wasn't looking for them, because that nightstand, as the policeman pointed out, was so small that it would hardly have apprehended a burglar. Say, what did this burglar look like? Well, he was a big one, like a bear. That big? Wow, what was he wearing? Blue jeans and a black shirt. He was also wearing a mask, like the one Daddy wears when he goes hunting with Mr. Bourne to shoot ducks. So your daddy has a mask like that too. Will you show me? I'd have to ask him where it is. I don't know. What else did you notice when you saw the robber? He had eyes like Dad's, and I don't remember anything else. I saw him literally just a little bit, got scared, and we quickly ran back inside. Police officers checking the house were unable to confirm the girl's account that the perpetrator was a burglar. There were no signs of forced entry at either the front or back door, although on the other hand, the gate to the garage was open and the perpetrator could have entered the house through the garage. Another thing that the police noted is that nothing was stolen from the house. Jewelry was left untouched, lying in a jewelry box, and the safe where Tom kept the cash was not even touched. The doors of the cabinets in the house were also all closed. Usually burglars check every little cabinet, every shelf, but here the whole mess was the aftermath of a fight. Experienced officers, it would seem, understood everything at once. Tom pretends to be a heartbroken husband, and it was he who killed his beloved wife and the mother of his children in order to further receive insurance payments. If Kelly's life was insured, and husbands' murderers developing a crime plan always insure the life of their wives, then in case of her death, he could get up to $1 million. All that's needed is to gather evidence and the case will be solved. Especially since even her own daughter said that the mask on the robber was like her father's and eyes like her father. However, the police did not find the hunting mask in the house. After finding out where Tom had spent his time that night, the police questioned the other poker players. "Is Tom the killer? Do you really suspect him?" wondered one of his friends. "That poor guy had his wife murdered, for crying out loud. And instead of looking for the bastard, you want to pin everything on him? How could you think of such a thing?" "No, Tom certainly couldn't have done it. I've known him a long time," replied another, less emotional friend. "He worked 2 jobs around the clock because he loved both Kelly and his kids. There's just no way that could happen. Plus, he was with us all night. We played poker, and even when everyone was tired, he kept insisting on continuing to play." "Tom really was suspicious that evening," said his acquaintance Laura. "During a break in the game, he took me into the next room and asked me to give him my phone to call his wife. He supposedly forgot his phone in the car and didn't want to go get it. I was first surprised that the car was 10 meters away from the house. Go to it and get the phone, but still gave him a call. He stepped back to make the call outside. I didn't hear who or what he was talking to, but when I decided to check the outgoing calls, there were no numbers in the call history, so he just deleted the call. Wouldn't you agree that's odd? I told my husband about it, and he was as surprised as I was. My husband was sitting at the playing table next to Tom and noticed that Tom was not watching the process of dealing cards or watching the people around him, which is very important in poker, but was sitting with his head bowed over the surface of the table where the cards were hiding the screen of his phone. He had his phone on him. Why had he tricked me then? Where was he calling? Who couldn't he call from his phone? After Laura's testimony, the police once again questioned Charlie, Tom's daughter, and the girl repeated what she had told the policeman the first time. The robber looked a lot like her father. The next testimony was given by the niece of the murdered, already after Tom was behind bars. "I didn't tell Aunt Kelly. I just didn't want to upset her. She was very fond of Tom. She literally loved him. And besides, she has 2 children by him. They are my sisters. Who needs my truth? Tom was not the man he appeared to be at first glance. Yes, he occasionally spoiled my aunt with attention and flowers. He could easily babysit, which other fathers rarely do. But that was all at home. And at work, he was a completely different person. Aunt Kelly decided to help me one day and arranged for Tom to take me to work for him. She was too young to be on her own, so she understood me as well as anyone and wanted the best for me. I worked for Tom all last summer, doing correspondence registration and document management. I didn't know him well before that, so at first we had a strictly working relationship. Then he got drunk somewhere and came to the office in that state. There was no one there but me and him, and for some reason he started to tell me that his family was fictitious. He loves his daughters very much, but he doesn't care about his wife, and he hasn't had any feelings for her for a long time. He's even had a few affairs on the side during their marriage, and even considered leaving Aunt Kelly, but he didn't, simply because he was afraid that a divorce might leave him without a house and without money. Looking ahead, it is important to note that some of the interviewed female participants of that evening's poker game confirmed the words of Kelly's niece, that Tom was not such a faithful husband and had a sexual relationship with 2 women who were also playing poker that night. In addition to the information about Tom's promiscuous life, Kelly's 16-year-old niece also told about another employee of Tom's firm, Michael Beard. Michael was doing repair work on houses after the fire, and he was doing a good job. But there was one moment in those houses where Bird worked, constantly missing things, and if the first few times Tom did not believe his customers, referring to the fact that during the fire, the owners could lose something. Then, when the accusations of theft began to be repeated for the third and fourth time, there was no doubt. Michael Bird not only restores the floor and walls, but also steals. Plus, in addition to stealing, there were complaints that Michael was allowing himself to come to work drunk. I was in the office when Michael's stealing came to light. Tom could yell at his employee and kick him out on the street. He was upset with his subordinate's behavior like that. He kept asking him, "How could you?" Or, "Haven't you thought about your family? Where are you going to work now?" After the incident, Tom fired Bird, but still called companies he knew and offered them to hire his former employee. Tom recommended Michael, and when all his options were exhausted, Tom took Bird in to help with the household, cutting the grass, watering the plants, doing minor repairs around the house. The detective called Michael Beard in for questioning. He said he only stole because he and his family needed the money. Tom was very good to me, defended me to the end, but I know it was my own fault. He has a very good wife. She fed me when I worked for them, even though she really shouldn't have. She also gave my children clothes that her daughters had grown out of. I am very grateful for all they have done for me. I feel so bad for Kelly. When I heard about her death, I couldn't believe my ears. I felt so bad. I even went to church and prayed for her to go to the best of all worlds. The police did not find anything strange in Michael's story and let him go, but the interrogation of his wife, Mrs. Bird, made the police doubt his words. According to his wife, Holly, Tom offered Michael some work, which he did not say, and for this work, he promised to pay him $10,000. Now that was interesting. Michael was called back to the station and had a lie detector hooked up to him. All questions were failed. Bird was lying and therefore failed the test. Realizing he couldn't get away with it, he began to testify. Indeed, Tom promised Bird $10,000 if Michael, on the day when Tom will play poker, sneak into his house, kill his wife, and set a fire in his house. The plan was to strangle Kelly and then make it look like she just burned to death in an accidental fire. Plus, the family home was insured for a very large sum of money. As the police checked, it was true. Kelly's home and life were insured at the highest rate. 2 cans of gasoline were waiting for Michael in the garage through which the house was to be entered. Everything was fine here. Bird entered the house when everyone was already asleep. He quietly began to climb the stairs and reach the bedroom where Kelly was supposed to be sleeping, but the young woman was either awake or awakened by the sound of the open door, and when she saw a strange man in the doorway, she began to scream in fright. Michael was just as frightened and pounced on Kelly, trying to close his huge hands around her neck, but it wasn't that easy. Kelly began to fight back. I had no idea that a seemingly fragile Kelly had so much strength in her, says Michael. A heck of a fight ensued, which spilled over from the second-floor bedroom to the first-floor kitchen. Michael, because of the shock and panic, could not concentrate on the fight, but only waved his arms in all directions or just grabbed Kelly's clothes while Kelly, defending her life, aimed very accurately at Michael's face. And if the police had come to Bird earlier, they would have seen the marks from the beatings on him. But everything turned out as it did.
After a long struggle, Michael hit Kelly's head against the wall with all his might. She fell, and for a while couldn't find the strength to get up. Michael took out a hammer and began hitting the young woman's head with it until she stopped showing signs of life. Michael, maddened by what had happened, just ran out of the house, even forgetting that Tom asked him not only to kill Kelly, but also to set the house on fire to cover up the crime. Michael had an accomplice, Mark Blanford, who, in fact, served only as a driver. The day before it happened, I got a call from Michael. I had worked with him on a construction site for a long time,
and I had stayed with him for a couple weeks last year, so I knew him well. I knew Michael was into petty theft, so when he called me and asked me to drive while he broke into someone's house, I wasn't surprised. I wanted to turn him down, but he offered me $500. I thought long and hard at first, but he talked me into it. He said he just wanted to rob a businessman, and he needed help to get out of there before the cops got there. He said he'd help with the car. I gave in to his entreaties, but on the condition that I park somewhere far away from the house, he agreed. That evening, I waited for him in that car in a dark alley, and he came back quickly enough, breathing heavily and telling me to move as fast as possible. He didn't have any bag or sack on him, which didn't look much like a robbery. I didn't ask him any questions along the way, simply because I didn't want to know anything. I just wanted my $500, which, by the way, I didn't end up getting. On the way out, he asked me to stop at a bridge over a creek a couple blocks south of here. I stopped there. He hastily stripped off his outer garments and threw them off the bridge. If you need to be shown the place, I'll show you. Indeed, police officers who arrived on the scene at Mark's behest found parts of Michael's outer clothing near the creek, as well as the hammer used to kill Kelly. Michael, already in custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, began to change his testimony. According to him, he was indeed hired by Tom, indeed for $10,000, but only to commit arson at the house and nothing more. There was no question of murder. When he went into the house, however, Kelly was already dead. "And who killed her?" the detective asked. "I think it was Tom. He offered me money for murder and arson from the beginning, but I refused the first offer. I'm not willing to kill a man for any money. He said I had nothing to fear, but he never could talk me into it. You may not believe me, but I almost lost my mind when I saw Kelly's body. I knew right then and there that he was setting me up, so I ran out of the house. He's the killer," Michael insisted. Michael spent a very long time assuring the police of his innocence, and all because he did not know that Mark had shown the place where Bird had thrown out his things, and that his clothes, as well as the murder weapon, had already been submitted for examination, and the experts found both on his clothes and on the hammer the blood of Kelly Clayton. And that was the most direct proof that it was him who killed Kelly, not someone else. In turn, Tom also did not admit that it was he who ordered the massacre of his wife from a former problem employee of his company. According to him, Michael knew that he had money, knew that he was not poor, and because Bird lost his job, as well as because of resentment associated with the dismissal, he decided to rob his house. But Kelly was at home that night, for which he paid with his life. It might have been difficult to prove Tom's guilt and his conspiracy with Michael if Laura, the woman who had been playing poker that night, had not told the police that Tom had called from her cell phone. The detective requested a transcript of her calls and expectations were confirmed. Then, on the night of September 28, 29, Tom Clayton called Michael Beard. Michael was the first to go to trial. He continued to insist that he had been hired to set fire to the house in order to collect the insurance payout. He didn't kill Kelly, and as for the blood on his clothes, it was just because he was touching a dead and mutilated body. That's why he got dirty. He'd thrown his stuff away so no one would think he'd been at Clayton's house that night. His speech sounded convincing. The jury had been deliberating for 7 hours. In the end, they concluded that Michael Beard was guilty on all counts. He was facing life in prison. As for Tom, his lawyers were able to obtain records of conversations and correspondence between him and Michael, and none of the conversations clearly discussed their devious plan. The prosecution's requests for billing transcripts of his movements yielded no concrete results either. All the evidence was circumstantial. If it weren't for one nuance, the car in which Mark had given Michael a ride was registered to Tom's company, and Tom, coming to the office on his personal Toyota, left it in the parking lot, where for some reason moved to the company pickup truck, which later drove to Michael's house and left there, and took back the day after the tragedy. That is, in fact, he gave Michael the car on which he and Mark went to the crime. It was this fact that was testified to at the trial by the jury, The trial lasted 6 days, and the jury concluded that Tom had hired Michael to commit this horrible crime after all. Michael, in turn, filed an appeal. In his defense, he used the words of little Charlie, who said that the eyes in the slit of the mask belonged to her father. However, the court rejected the appeal because the description of the clothes matched the one found under the bridge. As a result, Tom Clayton and Michael Beard received life sentences. As for Mark, he was charged with manslaughter, for which he received 4 years in prison. Tom and Kelly's children were given custody to Kelly's sister, Kin. After some time, Charlie has moved on from the tragedy. She occasionally remembers her mom, but absolutely won't talk about her father, who she will never see again.